Yeah, whenever you want. All right. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. First of all, Ramadan Mubarak, and Jazakumullahu khairan for all of you for attending. First of all, I want to say Jazakallahu khairan to the Islamic Center of San Gabriel Valley, ICSGV, for hosting us. Be sure also to take a look at their events, inshallah. They have weekly qiyams at the masjid. So tonight after Taraweeh, they should have a session on the authority of the Sunnah by Brother Yad Hilal. So please attend if that's of your benefit, inshallah. I wanted to give a bit of context about Al-Arqam Institute and a bit about this event in particular. So Al-Arqam Institute is a platform that seeks to try and improve literacy related to Islamic sciences and tries to also produce different contents like lectures, videos, articles, publications. You can see our social medias on the QR code outside, inshallah. We have a QR code published on the table. And we also have a recent publication of the Studies in Usul al-Fiqh book. So we have some copies available for purchase, and alternatively, you could find it online. One notable annual series that we tend to have is the Ramadan sessions, where we try to pick rather unconventional topics, but also topics that are relevant for Muslims to try and increase their Islam and try to reframe how they look at Islam throughout this month. So for the month of Ramadan, we chose the series or the theme, the month of triumph. And Ramadan being the month of the Quran and the month of guidance, we thought that it would be good for us to try and resist the secular notion or the notion that Ramadan is purely a individualistic month or a month where you just check off the boxes. Rather, Ramadan is a month where, if you look at Islamic history, Muslims have always tried to propagate Islam and have viewed Islam as a world-building project. So trying to resist that urge to try and secularize Islam or individualize Islam, we're trying to show Islam as a political and spiritual way of life. And with that in mind, we also figured it was a relevant topic considering what Muslims are going through throughout the world. So for example, we know the almost 6 month long siege of Gaza, and we also know what Muslims are going through in Sudan. So based on that, we thought it's important, and just on those two topics alone, we thought it's important for Muslims to try and revisit their own history, recognizing how we as Muslims look to our own history as a source of guidance, and how we can look to it for propagating lessons going forward. So we need to recognize that we're one, a transgenerational, a civilizational, and an ummatic project. We have had bleak moments in our Islamic history, but Muslims historically have looked to Ramadan as a month of revival and a month of triumph. And these aren't meant to just simply be stories for its own sake, but they're meant to be lessons that we take from and we draw upon. So to that end, we chose 4 major events, and there are a lot of events that happen throughout the month of Ramadan. But the 4 that we've chosen are 1, the Battle of Badr, 2, the liberation of Mecca, 3, the Battle of Hattin with Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi versus the Crusaders, and 4, the Battle of Ain Jalut with the Muslims against the Mongols. And you'll notice that all 4 of these events happen in the month of Ramadan. 2 of them happened during the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the latter 2 happened in Palestine. So I don't need to remind you all to try and keep Gaza in mind, because I feel like Muslims who have Iman in their hearts, we all recognize it's almost impossible to take Gaza out of our minds. So I don't need to advise you guys to try and draw lessons, but inshallah we should have a productive conversation where we gain context of the Battle of Badr, and we're also able to connect it to the situation that we're witnessing. So to that end, we have no better speaker than Dr. Osman Umarji, who is a longtime friend of Al-Arqam Institute. And especially in the post-COVID era, it's hard for a 501c3 nonprofit to find friends. So alhamdulillah, it's much better. But Dr. Osman Umarji holds a Bachelor's of Science in Electrical Engineering and a Master's and PhD in Educational Psychology from the University of California, Irvine. He studied Islam at Al-Azhar University in Cairo, Egypt, and his research interests include development of human motivation, religious socialization, spirituality, and Islamic legal theory, also making him a candidate for being a friend of Al-Arqam Institute. Dr. Umarji is also an adjunct professor in the School of Education at UC Irvine. He has previously taught child development, adolescent development, and statistics. His experience in both psychological and Islamic sciences allows him to conduct empirical research on contemporary issues facing Muslims. So if you ever get a Yaqeen survey in your inbox, please answer it. It's very important. Additionally, Dr. Umarji serves as a director of survey research and evaluation and a co-director of psychospirituality, the co-director at the psychospirituality department at Yaqeen Institute. So we'll be having about an hour and a half of lecture, but inshallah afterwards we'll have Q&A. If you have any questions, try and save them towards the end. And for those online, inshallah, please post them, and then we have a moderator looking at the comments. So without further ado, Dr. Osman.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه من والاه. It's always a pleasure to be here in the blessed month of Ramadan with you all. I think this is, how many years have we been doing this now? 6, 7 years, I think, at least. More, right? MashaAllah. Yeah, MashaAllah. So it's just an annual thing I also look forward to. So I never turn down this request because it is one of my favorite to be a part of. So alhamdulillah, I was very pleased when Al-Arqam reached out with the topic to speak about the ghazawat, right, of the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and in Islamic history, some of the major battles, because as everybody knows, right, the Muslim Ummah, for the last 100 years, but even before, has been in a time of weakness, right, without a khilafah, right, without having any sort of authority in the world. We have witnessed many massacres, many losses. We are seeing one today unfolding before our eyes every single day, being live streamed to us. And so the Muslims are in a psychological and physical state of weakness today. And it is very difficult for anybody, for any civilization, for any society to stand up and actually seek victory if they're psychologically defeated. And thus the endeavor to remind ourselves about our history and our victories in history is actually fundamental, right, in this cause. And it's something which was done all throughout Islamic history. Anytime Islamic history was at a low point, you would see the ulama and the institutes of that time ensuring that they were able to reinvigorate that love, right, of defending the Muslim world and motivating them through the stories of the past. So inshallah, today we'll speak about the greatest of all battles that has ever occurred in the history of humanity, the great Ghazwatul Badr, the Battle of Badr. Yeah, of course. Okay, can I see the present? Can I switch to presenter view by chance or no?
Because it's showing the screen
Okay,
on the live stream.
no problem. Perfect. All right. So inshallah, what we'll do is I'll try to recall the Battle of Badr as much detail as we can for about the first hour-ish, and then we'll speak about Gaza probably for another 30 minutes, and then we'll have a lot of time for discussion, inshallah. If you have any questions or comments on the particular slide that I'm on, the particular part of the battle, that is fine, but otherwise, if you can hold off any discussion until the end, it would be appreciated. So I want to begin with just this, again, this notion that Allah Azza wa Jalla reminds us in the Quran about telling our stories. When he says in Surah Ibrahim, وَلَقَدْ أَرْسَلْنَا مُوسَى بِآيَاتِنَا أَنْ أَخْرِجَ قَوْمَكَ مِنَ الظُّلُمَاتِ إِلَى النُّورِ وَذَكِّرْهُمْ بِأَيَّامِ اللَّهِ إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ لِكُلِّ صَبَّارٍ شَكُورٍ. So Allah here is telling us why it's important to narrate some of these stories. And he tells us through what Musa told his people. When Musa told his people, essentially, Musa is being told to take his people out of the darkness into the light and to remind them of the stories of Allah. So Musa in this case is reminding his people about the favors of Allah upon Bani Israel, because of course they were disobedient and rejecting time and time again. So he kept reminding them. And then this idea of وَذَكِّرْهُمْ بِأَيَّامِ اللَّهِ is kind of a constant theme that Muslims should be aware of, is reminding one another about the days of Allah, the days of Allah's blessings being upon us. And so Badr, of course, is the greatest of the days of Allah, and so that is why we speak about it. Second, though, Allah says, إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ لِكُلِّ صَبَّارٍ شَكُورٍ. Indeed, in that are signs for every person who is a person of patience and a person of gratitude. And of course, patience is what we're in desperate need of today as we're dealing with the situation that Muslims are in, to not fall into despair, to not fall into hopelessness. And that is actually so much what we have researched at Yaqeen, of how much hopelessness is in the Ummah right now because of Gaza. So hopefully through these stories, we're able to alleviate some of that. And then to just even make a step further about how central the Ghazawat of the Prophet Muhammad are supposed to be to the Muslim kind of upbringing and the system of tarbiyah. There's many statements of the righteous, right, the great grandson of the Prophet Muhammad Zain al-Abidin, right, he is the one who said, كُنَّا نُعَلَّمُ مغازي رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم كما نعلم السورة من القرآن. He says that we used to learn the battles of the Prophet Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم just like we were taught a surah from the Quran. And when you think about how you teach the Quran, people don't come to you and say, let me recite to you the surah and then go home and then you're done. No one learns a surah like that. To learn a surah of the Quran, a teacher will recite to you the verse and you'll repeat the verse, right? You will go home and you'll review it over and over and over. And this back and forth occurs until the surah is deep into your soul and you can recite it from memory. So I want you to take that parallel to the Ghazawat of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, that the early generations were saying that we were taught these surahs the same way we were taught these battles the same way that we were taught the surahs from the Quran, which means it has to be repetitive, over and over and over for ourselves, right, and for our children. And that's why the son of Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, Muhammad ibn Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, he said that كان أبي يعلمنا مغازي رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وسراياه ويقول يا بني هذه مآثر آبائكم فلا تضيعوها. That Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas used to tell his son that his son said that that essentially we need to learn these stories about the battles of the Prophet Muhammad because these were the best days of our life, the greatest thing we have put forward. And so the Sahaba's children learned as well that this was something fundamental to focus on. And that's why Imam al-Zuhri, he famously said, ilm al-maghazi wa saraya, ilm al-dunya wal-akhirah. He said that the knowledge of the battles of the Prophet Muhammad is that which we think about when it comes to the knowledge of this dunya and the afterlife. How? It's knowledge of the afterlife, of course, because it is iman building, right? It serves us when we meet Allah Azza wa Jal, that we have love for the companions, we have love for the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu. But it's also ilm for this dunya because it teaches us how to function, how to think, how to strategize, how to group together, how to think about our enemy, how to envision our enemy, to know the psyche of our enemy. And all this we'll speak about as well during the battle. And I also want to just kind of put a plug here for what I have found to be a trend in how the seerah has been taught in the last few decades in Western kind of situations more so. It's a very post 9/11 way of teaching the seerah, which was to depoliticize the seerah and kind of focus on the personal aspects of the Prophet's life, meaning kind of the family life. And I think that there's a wisdom in that, but it went overboard. And what I remember happening, around the early 2000s was this notion that even pre 9/11 is that when you look at a book of seerah, it is heavy on the battles. But when you look at the life of a typical American Muslim, right, or a British Muslim, where do they draw from that, right? Suburban Muslims, kind of immigrant communities, were like that seems less relevant to them. And they said, well, how do we function as husbands and as fathers and as mothers and daughters and community members? For that reason, ulama and teachers in the communities began to emphasize more of the Prophet's family life. How was he, again, like a father? How was he, again, like a community member? How was he treating his daughters and his wives? But with 9/11 coming in, it became even more political. We don't want to speak about anything to do with military aspects, with political issues, and that discourse kind of went underground as being viewed as too dangerous to speak about. And of course, that has done a tremendous kind of damage to the psyche of Muslim youth. For those who were raised pre 9/11, at least you still know that part of the seerah. But for those who were born after 9/11 in particular, it's actually amnesia, cultural amnesia. When you ask them anything about that part of the Prophet's life, it's just kind of like, I really don't know anything. Right? I know he was nice, I know he was kind, he was good to his neighbors, he was good to his wives, but how did he strategize? What were the battles about? Why did they fight? I really have no idea. And so really I want us to bring back the necessary ingredient of thinking about the seerah. And our good friend, Sami Hamdi, right, we speak about Allah, he's really been key on this point, trying to draw elements of the seerah into our political discourse, because this is what's going to give us the ability to think about our current predicament and to plan and to strategize so we have kind of a sunnah-based roadmap for how to deal with everything that comes before us. And so I'll begin before the Battle of Badr, because we need to kind of take a step back and talk a little bit about what happened in Mecca. And what happened in Mecca is the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and his companions are being persecuted, right? They are being fought. Even some of them are being killed, right? There are martyrs, right, even in Mecca. But the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is being told, and he's telling his companions that I have not been given permission to fight yet. So we need to be patient. And one might question, why is the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ not allowing his companions to physically engage in combat despite the fact they are being physically attacked? And the ulama have written a lot about this. Some of the reasons why. Number one is the necessity of building their iman during this time, because it's still a very new faith to them, right? Who is Allah Azza wa Jal, right? What are the core aspects of iman? What is the Quran? Kind of learning kind of basic Quranic principles and a Quranic worldview. And so this is the emphasis right now. Don't worry, because fighting has its own dimension to it. You have to strategize, you have to train, right? You have to be, and it's going to escalate very quickly. So the element of focusing on iman, spirituality, and character reformation was the central point of the Meccan dawah. And then, of course, upon that as well as the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ doesn't want to have a bigger issue in the Arabian Peninsula. They're still all pagans, right? And to immediately wake up and start fighting against your local tribe, right, would be problematic. So he focused on dawah to those in Quraysh and even those in the surrounding tribes that are around him. And the third thing that one could even think about is that the necessity of actually building up an army or building up a group of followers, because how are you going to fight when you're a dozen people or you're 20 people? Right? This is not even enough people to get together for a battle, let alone to conquer your tribe and the Arabian Peninsula. And so the Prophet ﷺ, as the years of Mecca are going by, the hostilities are increasing, and it's no longer just throwing trash on him, it's no longer just cursing him, it's no longer just beating up a companion who's reciting Quran, right? It actually is now killing Sahaba, boycotting the Muslims, economic warfare. And really, the situation gets worse and worse until they plan to assassinate the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Right? Famous incident before, right, the hijrah that we all know, when the Prophet has to leave in the darkness and put Ali ibn Abi Talib in his place, right, in his bed as he sneaks out, right, to make hijrah with Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. So Quraysh has made it very clear, a declaration of bloodshed, that we will kill you if you do not change your religion. And we will not only kill your followers, right, but we will take their wealth. They took the wealth of those who tried to migrate. So it's economic warfare in this regard. And eventually, as the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ makes the hijrah, which is a necessity, not just for his individual life, and not just to save the life of the muhajirun, but it becomes a necessity in order for Islam to realize its full potential. And this point, again, has to be emphasized, that it cannot be simply this religion is a religion of we will pray, right, and we will pay zakah, and we will do charity and individual ibadah, but it must manifest itself at a societal level. And it must manifest itself kind of as a state, because only a state can spread Islam and secure the well-being of Muslims. And so the Prophet looks and seeks for a place till he finds an opening, right, in Yathrib, which becomes Medina. And as he heads out, Abu Bakr famously comments, he looks back actually at Quraysh and he says, these people have driven out their Prophet. He says, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un, that they will be destroyed. And he comments that then one of the first verses to come down after the hijrah was where Allah Azza wa Jal says, أُذِنَ لِلَّذِينَ يُقَاتَلُونَ بِأَنَّهُمْ ظُلِمُوا وَإِنَّ اللَّهَ عَلَى نَصْرِهِمْ لَقَدِيرٌ. That Allah reveals now, immediately after the hijrah, that permission has been granted, permission to fight has been granted to those who have been fought because they have been oppressed. And indeed, Allah is able to support them and to give them victory. And that's when Abu Bakr said that I knew that there would be fighting. So the Sahaba were under no kind of false pretense that moving to Medina would somehow just be a safe haven and they would get away scot-free and build their state in peace. And actually, they knew the opposite, which is that Quraysh's hostility would continue even after they are, hundreds and hundreds of kilometers away, kind of out of sight, but not out of mind. And very early in the phase of Medina, the hostilities are shown clearly to the Muslims. Two stories I'll mention briefly. One is Sa'd ibn Mu'adh, the leader of Al-Aws, right, from the Ansar. He plans a trip to Umrah. And still, between Mecca and Medina, there were friendships between people who lived there, between the Muslims and the non-Muslims. So the Ansar, many of them are close to many of the people, right, who lived even in Mecca. Because Mecca and Medina was a famous trade route, they would go from Mecca through Sham, they would stop in Medina, and vice versa. So Sa'd ibn Mu'adh, he has an intention shortly after the hijrah. The Prophet ﷺ is settled there, right? They're building the masjid, and he takes off and says, I want to go and make my own umrah. And what he would do is every time he would go to Mecca, he would stay with one of his closest friends, Umayyah ibn Khalaf. Most people here probably know who Umayyah ibn Khalaf is, one of the leaders, right, of Quraysh, one of the staunch enemies of the Muslims, the one who owned Bilal ibn Rabah and who beat him and tortured him, put the rock on him, right, and so many other things he was famous for in his aggression against the Muslims. But this old friendship from Jahiliyyah was there. So Sa'd, whenever he would go and visit, even in Jahiliyyah, Mecca, he would stay with Umayyah ibn Khalaf, and vice versa. Umayyah ibn Khalaf, anytime he would travel in Medina, he would stay with Sa'd ibn Mu'adh. So he goes and he visits Umayyah ibn Khalaf, and he's staying at his house, and he says, tell me a good time I can go out and make tawaf. I can go to the masjid and make tawaf. So Umayyah ibn Khalaf tells him, you know what, let's go in the middle of the day, right? Dhuhr time, right? When it's hot, people take their nap. No one's going to be out. So he takes Sa'd ibn Mu'adh, and Sa'd ibn Mu'adh is beginning to make his tawaf, Who does he meet other than Abu Jahl? And Abu Jahl sees him and he says to him, he says, what do you think you're doing here? You and your people have given safe haven to the people who have left our faith, meaning you've given safe haven to the Muhajirun, and you've promised to support them and to defend them. He said, I swear to God, if you are not under the protection of Umayyah ibn Khalaf, you would not leave here safely, meaning I would kill you right now. So Sa'd ibn Mu'adh responds to him and he says that, you know what, if you dare stop me from making tawaf, then I will threaten you with something greater. If you try to come back through Medina, you will not be allowed through to make a safe passage. So now it escalates, right? And before it becomes kind of an altercation, Umayyah ibn Khalaf, he gets involved. He sees his friend Sa'd arguing with the leader of his tribe, Abu Jahl, and he says, lower your voice in the presence of Abu al-Hakam, right? That's the nickname, that was the name of Abu Jahl that was given to him, of course, by his people. Abu Jahl was a nickname the Muslims gave him. Instead of being the one of the father of, or the one of wisdom, he's the one of ignorance. And so he tells him, keep your voice down in the company, right, of Abu Jahl, that he's our leader. So Sa'd essentially rebukes him and he says, you know what? Shut up, Umayyah. For the Prophet Muhammad told me that the Muslims are going to kill you. And so Umayyah freaks out because he knows, and the people of Quraysh, they know that the Prophet Muhammad speaks the truth, right? They know it's a fact and they're rejecting that truth that's in their heart. So he then panics and he says to Sa'd, in Mecca, meaning I'm going to get killed in Mecca? He goes, I don't know if he said that. I don't know if it's Mecca or not. So eventually, Sa'd, as he makes his return trip right back to Medina, right, then Umayyah goes back to his wife. And he says, oh, Safwan, right, their eldest son, Safwan ibn Umayyah. He says, do you know what Sa'd told me? He's like coming back and saying, do you know what one of my best friends told me? He said that Muhammad said that his companions are going to kill me. So I asked him if it's going to be in Mecca, and he says, I don't know. He goes, I swear to God, I'm not going to leave Mecca. So that's the first altercation that occurs. Shortly after this incident, now Abu Jahl realizes, look, Arabia, the entire Arabian Peninsula would go and visit Mecca to go and perform their rites. And it was known that Quraysh was honorable because they gave them safe passage. And now the Muslims have the audacity to challenge that, essentially. And that's going to create a problem in the Arabian Peninsula. So he sends a letter. Abu Jahl, Umayyah, Rabi'a, right, Utbah, Shayba, all of the leaders, essentially Al-Walid of Quraysh, they send a threatening letter to Medina, and they send it to the leader at that time of still the non-Muslims of Medina, who is Abdullah ibn Ubay ibn Salul, right, the leader of the hypocrites, but yet he's not a hypocrite yet. He actually hasn't publicly proclaimed his Islam. He's just kind of in the sit and wait phase. And so he gets this letter, and it says to him that, again, it's a very threatening letter. It says, you gave protection to our companion, meaning you gave protection to Muhammad. And we swear to God, either you fight him or you expel him, or else we will come and kill your men fighters and we will capture your women. So now the non-Muslims of Medina, they have a threat. So Abdullah ibn Ubay gets together with his friends. And remember, he's supposed to be the leader of Medina. He was next in line for leadership. But when the Prophet came, it threw a wrench in his plan. So he's kind of staying quiet. So he begins to actually call his allies forth to say, let's plot a plan to fight the Muslims. And so the Prophet Muhammad gets revelation of this. And he goes to Abdullah ibn Ubay and says, the threat of Quraysh has surely come to you. And he warns them not to escalate. He goes, will you then fight your sons, right, and your fathers and your family members? So Abdullah ibn Ubay knows the Prophet is aware of the plot, and he de-escalates. So now the Muslims are, again, it's very clear that they have been physically threatened, right? That their own, ally, or not allies, but their own kind of co-citizens in Medina have been threatened, and they're scared. So it is really, at this point, a declaration of war. This is literally a declaration of war that has been given, right, to the Muslims. So what does the Prophet Muhammad do? In that first year, they are building the masjid, right? The Muhajirun and the Ansar are getting to know one another with the ta'akhi, right, the brotherhood that has been established. The Prophet actually does a census, and he does this actually regularly. So he does a census and he figures out how many Muslims do we have in Medina now? How many male fighters do we have? And they find out they have about 1,500 males who are capable of fighting. And so during this time, right, the Muslims are constantly on guard, right? They're in a state of just kind of making sure that nobody can enter into Medina, maybe kind of surreptitiously get in, possibly attack the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so they are constantly, vigilantly protecting the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this is right outside, the masjid. There's usually a guard. Ali ibn Abi Talib was known to be one of the regular guards. Many other companions, they would take shifts, right, in Hiras of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the Prophet begins to say they're not fighting just yet. They have permission to fight, but they haven't been commanded to fight. So he actually begins more of a psychological preparation and then actual military training. And he begins to encourage them for the virtues of martyrdom, encourages them about the importance of learning how to fight. And then he actually begins to organize them as a head of state and actually having military trainings and expedition and military trainings and exercises where they have to learn spear throwing, they have to learn archery, they have to learn sword fighting, they have to learn, cavalry, how to ride on a horse and wield your sword and wield your bow and your arrow. And then he even begins to give them the hadith where he's telling about the value, right, of learning how to do archery. This is not something foreign to them. They knew how to do this, but now to actually do it kind of from not like just as a jahili cultural thing, but actually as a religious thing. This is where he said, وَعِدُّ لَهُمْ مَسْتَطَعْتُ مِنْ قُوَّةٍ. He says, prepare for them whatever you can of strength. And then he said 3 times, he says, أَلَا إِنَّ الْقُوَّةَ الرَّمِي, أَلَا إِنَّ الْقُوَّةَ الرَّمِي, أَلَا إِنَّ الْقُوَّةَ الرَّمِي. He says that indeed strength is in archery, indeed strength is in archery, indeed strength is in archery. And then he said, even more so, more kind of escalating, he said, مَنْ عَلِمَ الرَّمِي ثُمَّ تَرَكَهُ فَلَيْسَ مِنَّا أَوْ قَدْ عَصَى. The narration is different, that the Prophet said, whoever learns archery, then he abandons it, then he is not from us, or it was narrated that he said, or he has sinned. So the companions are regularly now doing this, right? They're grappling and it's being organized kind of as a military exercise. Then the 2nd year of the Hijrah comes and the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is now given the explicit command to fight. Allah says, وَقَاتِلُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ الَّذِينَ يُقَاتِلُونَكُمْ وَلَا تَعْتَدُوا إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُحِبُّ الْمُعْتَدِينَ. Allah says, and now fight, a command to fight in the sake of Allah, in the cause of Allah, those who have fought you, and do not aggress, for Allah does not love those who commit aggression. And so the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ takes this immediately, and he begins to send out a number of military expeditions, small expeditions and incursions. This is not yet all-out warfare, but it is small strategic gathering of companions. And some of the ulama mentioned it was almost exclusively muhajirun. Some say it was only muhajirun, but likely there was some ansar, but vast majority of them were from the migrants. And so these small saraya or bu'uth, essentially what they were these excursions where the Prophet ﷺ would sometimes go, or he would send the companions to gather military intelligence. Where is Quraysh? What are they doing? Where have they set up their alliances? What are their trade routes? They're kind of figuring out more and more and more. And then it would also, so they do this for a number of reasons. Number one, they wanted Quraysh to be on guard. That we're not going to sit back here and wait for you to attack. We're actually going to be out and about. So now Quraysh is kind of scared. As we're traveling through, we could get attacked. It's also a message to the Arabian Peninsula that the Muslims are strong and we're going to actually fight. It's also meant to do ambushes and actually to gather wealth, because it's economic warfare. And so the Prophet Muhammad, like I said, he participated in some and not in others. So I want to go through some of these, because people often think the Battle of Badr is the first war in Islam. It's not the first war in Islam. It's the first kind of all-out combat, but it's not the first. There was many that happened before it. All of them began in the early 2nd year after the Hijrah. So if we begin in the month of Safar, the Prophet Muhammad actually went out himself, what's known as Ghazwat al-Abwa or Ghazwat al-Wadan. And this is where he took about 200 companions. And they saw Quraysh, and Quraysh recognized that the Muslims were there, but there was someone who knew both tribes, essentially, who got involved and kind of made sure that there was no fighting that took place. So the Muslims, they went back. But still counts as a ghazwa or as a battle, because the Prophet Muhammad was armed and the Muslims were there, essentially, ready to fight. And that's in the month of Safar. In the same month, there was the expedition of the Sariya of Ubaidah ibn Harith. And so in this expedition, he took out 60 Muslims, and they met 200 non-Muslims from Quraysh that was led by Abu Sufyan. And this is the famous Sariya when Sa'd ibn Waqqas, was excited because he was the first person ever, right, to shoot an arrow for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal, right? And so that even though there was no casualties, right, there was an attempt to inflict damage on the enemy, but nothing occurred. Very shortly after, again in the same month, the expedition of Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib, where he took 30 Muslims, and they met 300 of them from Quraysh, led by Abu Jahl, and again, no fighting took place because a mediator, again, did not allow that to happen. Now we get to the next month of Rabi' al-Awwal, and we have Ghazwat of Bawat, And that is what the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he took 200 companions because they heard there was a caravan led by Umayyah ibn Khalaf, and they planned to ambush it. And they missed the caravan, meaning when they set up their ambush, the caravan had already passed by, so no fighting it took place. Then you have Ghazwat al-Ushayra, which is again when the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ took a group of companions when he heard Abu Sufyan is leaving from Mecca and he's going to Sham. So he's going in from Mecca to Sham. So they said, let us go and attack them. And again, they set up an ambush. They heard that Abu Sufyan left on a certain date. So they anticipated he would be in a certain region on a particular date. They waited there, but again, they missed the caravan. It actually preceded them already. And this actually occurred at the very end of Jamada al-Ula and Jamada al-Ukhra. So again, we're getting very close now, right? Very close to the month of Ramadan is coming a few months away. So we get now to the month of Rajab. And the Prophet Muhammad sends his cousin, the great Sahabi who was martyred in Uhud, Abdullah ibn Jahsh, radiallahu anh, and he sends them on a reconnaissance mission with 8 companions. It was a very small group to spy. And the Prophet Muhammad did not tell them to fight because Rajab is one of the Ashhur al-Huram, it is one of the sacred months. But Abdullah ibn Jahsh, he kind of felt that he's there, that it was a golden opportunity because it was like easy money for them. They saw a small group of people from Mecca, not armed very well, with some possessions. And so they attacked them and they ended up killing the leader of that caravan, Amr ibn Hadrami. They also took 2 captives and they also took their possessions. So they went back to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and the Prophet was actually not happy because he said, I did not tell you to fight. I told you to simply go and to gather intelligence. And then Quraysh exploited this incident. And they said, look, the Muslims, they are making it halal to fight in the sacred months. They are breaking the old Arab custom of not fighting in the sacred months. The Jews took this as well and they started to spread rumors. And now even the Muslims and the non-Muslims in Medina are having kind of conflict because they're saying, what are we doing? We're not following our customs, and why would we do this? And so then Allah Azza wa Jalla reveals in Surah Al-Baqarah the ayat, يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الشَّهْرِ الْحَرَامِ قِتَالٍ فِيهِ قُلْ قِتَالٌ فِيهِ كَبِيرٌ وَصَدٌّ عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ وَكُفْرٌ بِهِ وَالْمَسْجِدِ الْحَرَامِ وَإِخْرَاجُ أَهْلِهِ مِنْهُ أَكْبَرُ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ وَالْفِتْنَةُ أَكْبَرُ مِنَ الْقَتْلِ. So Allah absolves Abdullah ibn Jahsh and those companions by saying, they ask you about fighting in the sacred months. Say that fighting in those months is big. It's a big deal. It's a sin. It's not permissible. But let's not equate what Quraysh has done with what Abdullah ibn Jahsh has done. But the action of disbelieving in Allah and blocking people from getting to the masjid and driving its people out, right? And all these other acts of aggression are far worse to Allah. And that fitna of Quraysh is far worse than the killing of Amr ibn Hadrami. And then Allah then continues, وَلَا يَزَالُونَ يُقَاتِلُونَكُمْ حَتَّى يُرَدُّوكُمْ عَنْ دِينِكُمْ إِنْ اسْتَطَاعُوا. Kind of re-emphasizing that, look, Quraysh will not stop fighting you until you leave your faith. So don't think you're going to be able to get away without a conflict occurring. And so again, this is Rajab, right, coming very close again to the month of Ramadan. Now we come to the second year again, and we're just before we're in the month of Sha'ban, 1 month before Ramadan. And I just want us to take a moment to situate ourselves with what the companions are going through. They moved about 1.5 years ago. The masjid is built, right? They have built the bonds of brotherhood, right? Their state is established. And now Allah Azza wa Jal gives them a new qibla in the month of Sha'ban. So they turn from Al-Quds and they face Mecca. And then Allah Azza wa Jal reveals to them the ayat of fasting, right? كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الصِّيَامُ, right? شَهْرُ رَمَضَانَ الَّذِي أُنزِلَ فِيهِ الْقُرْآنُ. And they're super excited. Super excited. Finally, we're settled and we can have a masjid and we can pray in the month of Ramadan. And the month of Ramadan begins and they're fasting. And the first 3 nights, Prophet Muhammad leads them in Taraweeh and he's leading them in the masjid. Everyone is ecstatic. And after 3 nights, he goes back to his house after Isha. He doesn't lead them in Taraweeh and he tells them to go back home and pray, for he worries it will become an obligation upon them. And that continues for the remainder, right, of these days. And a few weeks pass, so now we're just on the 12th, actually, of Ramadan, and business is going on. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he catches wind because he has intelligence everywhere. And he knew that caravan, they've already tried to attack a few caravans. That same caravan they tried to attack in Ghazwat al-Ushayra, that was Abu Sufyan going from Mecca to Sham. He now hears is coming back from Sham to Mecca. And they have to pass through very close to Medina. to the area around Badr. And so the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ comes back, he tells the companions, quickly, 12th of Ramadan, and he says that this is Abu Sufyan's caravan, it has the wealth of Quraysh, let us go and attack it, perhaps Allah will give it to you. And it's only got 30 to 40 men. So he grabs about 300 some of his men, different narrations. Bukhari says around between 311 and 319. Muslim says it's actually 319, different opinions, whatever, it's around that number. And that's an easy group. So it's 10 times the amount of Quraysh, right? They had 30, they're over 300. He said, let us quickly go. Don't go back home. You don't have to go get all your weapons, your horses, everything else. Let us quickly get out there to meet them on their travel route so we can ransack and attack their caravan. And so the Prophet leaves with about 60 plus muhajirun, about 240-ish of the Ansar, and he has only 2 horses. Again, that's Miqdad ibn Aswad and Zubair ibn Awam. They have the 2 horses. And like I said, they haven't taken out all the provisions for war. They're not wearing their armor. Everyone doesn't have their shields, right? It's bare bones. Grab what you can quickly, and let's get out of here quickly to march. And keep in mind, there was no intention for battle here. It was, let's just quickly go, attack the caravan, take all the possessions back. I want to stop on this for a moment because people often make the assumption that Muslims can only fight, right, if someone shoots you first, right? There's already been a declaration of war. There's already been attacks on the Prophet's life. There's already been, this escalation over and over again. So the Muslims are not required to sit back and wait. When you come and you shoot me, now I'm going to get up in self-defense. So the Prophet Muhammad is preemptively here saying, let us go. We're already in war, and inflict some serious economic damage, right, on Quraysh and send a signal. And that is important when, inshallah, later we talk about even kind of current situations in the world. And so the Prophet Muhammad begins to march, and he doesn't tell the people of Medina where they're going, because he also knows that there could be, spies amongst people of Medina, right? People who, will go back and tell, Quraysh. So he just tells the companions to go. And they begin to march in the direction of Badr. And the Prophet Muhammad on the journey, again, I want us to appreciate the little things sometimes. As he's marching, like he's not doing a full head count. This is like, whoever's here, get up and let's go. And they head out. And so a lot of great companions, there's other companions who are not there. And also companions who sneak in. And so amongst the companions who sneak in, we have 2 teenagers. We have Abdullah ibn Umar, radiallahu anhuma, and Al-Bara ibn Azib. And the Prophet Muhammad sees them kind of as they're on their journey and says to them, you need to go back home. Like you're too young. Like you're 13 years old, right? And actually Abdullah ibn Umar was fascinating. He did the same thing the next year. He's 14 now. He sneaks into Uhud and he gets sent back again. And finally he's able to fight, a couple years later when he's older. But I want to stop on this because I want us to recognize how the society was then, and how even the young men were. That you have a 13-year-old who's like, there's a battle, and he's like, I want to participate. And he gets up and he rushes, and his heart is in it. And to be very blunt, he probably was prepared for the battle, right? Many companions, of course, last thing the Prophet says before he dies, he sends the army, right, of Osama ibn Zayd, who was, again, some narrations 15, 16 years old, right, at that time. So the Prophet had teenagers who are capable of being in battles. And I just want us to pause here and just kind of check our own parenting, because we often have this false belief. That's a very kind of Western mindset, particularly that kids, you're supposed to let them just be kids, right? Let them play games, let them mess around, and kind of when they're 18 years old, we'll try to treat them like adults. The Prophet Muhammad has servants, Anas ibn Malik, who's 10, right? And other servants who are young boys, who has doing serious work from 10, 11, 12 years old, being given responsibilities that today we would not give probably to an 18-year-old because we think he's not ready for it. So to think about how we train our kids to be physically capable and psychologically capable of doing whatever's necessary, right, to defend Islam and to be kind of strong men. And that includes physical, like combat skills and so on and so forth, right? Are they able to fight, self-defense, right? Because that is a prerequisite, especially in a state where there is Islamophobia, right? Where kids are likely being picked on. And if you cannot stand up for yourself, right, that's going to actually be a threat to your faith. And so the Prophet sends them back. And then another situation comes quickly where, as they're traveling, a non-Muslim comes to them who's a well-known strong fighter. And he tells the Prophet Muhammad, he says, oh, Muhammad, I want to join you, right? I believe in your cause. Meaning, like, I know that you're not in the wrong against Quraysh. As the Prophet says, do you believe in Allah and His Messenger? He says, no. He said, فَرْجَعْ فَلَنْ أَسْتَعِينَ بِمُشْرِكٍ. He goes, then go back. I will not rely upon an idolater. And the companions were actually very hopeful. They're like, man, this is another soldier, a big, strong soldier. And the Prophet says, go back. And so the man, he then kind of goes back, and the Muslims move on, and he meets them a second time. And he says, come on, Muhammad, let me go with you. He goes, do you believe in Allah and His Messenger? He says, no. He goes again, irja' falan asta'ina bi mushrik. Third time, he meets the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He says, oh Muhammad, let me be with you. And he goes, do you believe in Allah and the Messenger? He says, yes, I do now. So he goes, okay, you can join the battle, right? And again, to stop here, the ulama, they debate, what this means. But again, what seems apparent is the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam wanted the Muslims to have this sense of self-reliance, that we rely upon ourselves. And also the Prophet probably knew this guy's heart was in the right place. So if he pushed him that, you know what, you can't come with us if you're not a Muslim, right? Then perhaps that would, push him towards Islam. And so of course he then accepted Islam, was able to participate. And so the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ continues a journey with the companions. And Abu Sufyan is shrewd and smart, and he has his spies and he has his people doing the exact same thing the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ has been doing. So the same way the Prophet has his expeditions and people who are watching, people who are paying attention, reporting back about the whereabouts of Quraysh, Abu Sufyan has been doing the exact same thing, and Quraysh has been doing the exact same thing. So he catches wind from his reports on the ground that the Muslims are planning to ambush him. So he quickly, and this you can see on this map here a little bit, he decides to turn away from the path towards Medina, and he turns towards the ocean of Yanbu'a, right, which is the spring there, as the Muslims are actually heading in the direction, right, of Badr. That's the first thing he does to secure the caravan. The second thing he does is he hires a man from the tribe of Ghifar, and his name is Damdam ibn Amr, and he says, rush back to Quraysh as fast as you can and give them a warning and tell them to come out to defend us. So Damdam ibn Amr al-Ghifari, he goes back to Quraysh as fast as he can on his camel, and he puts on a show. He tears up his clothes in the front, he tears up his clothes in the back, he chops off the nose of his camel, and he enters into Mecca and he starts screaming. He's Al-Latima, Al-Latima, the caravan, the caravan. All of your wealth that's with Abu Sufyan is under attack by Muhammad and his companions. He says, I don't know if you're going to be able to get there in time. Help, get out there and help him quickly. So Quraysh is furious. And they're like, are you like, Muhammad's going to he thinks this is easy to attack us? And they begin to mobilize. And Abu Sufyan also what he does is he wants to confirm. Because the Prophet Muhammad, what he did, actually before he even marched, is he sent a Sahabi, Basbas, to go and confirm the details were true, that is Abu Sufyan really on his way back? And who's with him and so on and so forth. So he got confirmation, so he left. So Abu Sufyan also wants confirmation, so he goes. And he goes towards Badr by himself. And then he asked the people of the desert, have you seen anyone here? Anyone who doesn't belong here? And he said that we saw a couple people. He goes, show me where they were. So they show him where those people passed by, and he goes and he digs and he looks to find the scat of the animals that they were on. Very clever, right? And he goes and he takes the dried scat and he breaks it up, and he sees in that scat there's seeds from the plants that they consume. And he goes, these are the seeds of Medina. And he's able to confirm that the Prophet and his companions are coming. Again, I want to stop here. There are old school skills that people would have, right? That today, actually, there are people who still have these, but we've become very kind of city slickers and dwellers. We've lost some of these ability to read the natural world, but they're fundamental, right? Historically, and even in today, they have a benefit. So there are little things that you might not think a lot about, but you never know when some life skill can come in handy, right? To serve yourself, right? Or to serve the community. So Damdam, like I said, he goes, he spreads the news, Quraysh is up in arms, and around the same time, one of the Prophet's relatives, Atika ibn Abdul Muttalib, she has a dream. And she goes, and she's the aunt of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and she has a dream, and in this dream, she said, a man comes, and he says, O Quraysh, right, go forth for 3 days to your death. And then he goes to the masjid, and he gets on his, gets towards the masjid, and he says the exact same thing. March forth, O Quraysh, for 3 days to your death. Then he climbs on top of a mountain, and he says the exact same thing. O Quraysh, march forth for 3 days to your death. And he throws down a rock from the mountain, and it breaks, and it shatters, and some of that rock goes into every house of the people who are in Quraysh. So she comes and she tells Abbas. And this time Abbas is not a Muslim. And then Abbas tells one of his friends, but this is supposed to be a secret. He's like, like just kind of, this is what's the rumors are going around. And that friend goes and tells everybody. So now everybody knows that this dream has happened. So now Abu Jahl confronts Abbas and he says, what's up with this dream? He goes, what are you talking about? He's playing dumb. And he says, there's this dream. He's like, what? Like, is there another prophet from, the tribe, from the tribe of Abdul Muttalib, right? First you have Muhammad making prophecies, right? Now your sister's making prophecies. And so he's again rejecting that. And he begins to give a speech. And then even Umayyah ibn Khalaf, now he realizes that Quraysh is assembling an army. They're 1,300 strong. And every able-bodied man is being encouraged to go. Either he has to go or send a representative on his behalf. So Abu Lahab actually doesn't go fight. There's a man who owed him 4,000 dirhams. He sends him on his behalf. But Umayyah remembers. He remembers now what happened to him a year ago when Sa'ad told him, you're going to die, right? And he goes, I'm not going to leave Mecca. So he tries to also say, I don't want to leave. I don't want to fight. So they come to him and they try to convince him. One of his allies, Uqba, goes to him and he does something very clever. He takes out some woman's perfume and he takes out the perfume and he says, here, smell this, Umayyah. And he's like, this is a woman's perfume. You're a woman. This is for you, right? Again, eating kind of at that chivalry within their heart. And he's okay, fine. I'm going to get up and I'm going to go. And then Abu Lahab, he actually gives a speech, right? Where he gets up and he tells people before his speech, as they're getting ready. Now they get news from Abu Sufyan that actually we've redirected the caravan. All right, we're actually safe. You don't actually have to come out and fight. But Abu Jahl is convinced that no, we absolutely have to go out and we have to destroy the Muslims. And so when some of the people here from Banu Zahra, one of the tribes of Quraysh, they withdraw 300 people. So they go from 1,300 to 1,000. So Abu Jahl is realizing, well, this could fall apart. So he gets up and he gives a very passionate speech. And he says, we will go forth for 3 days. And we will take our women and the singers and the dancers and alcohol and camels. We will slaughter these camels and we'll camp and enjoy ourselves for 3 days. So all of Arabia knows what we have done. And so now Quraysh again feels a sense of boldness to say, let's go forth. And so they begin to march towards the battle. And so the Prophet Muhammad and his companions, so we said, this is all the 12th night started. And Badr is 150 kilometers from Medina, so it takes them a few days to get there, right? And also from Mecca, it's also a couple hundred kilometers, if not more, right? And so it's going to take them a few days to get there. So these days are passing, and the Muslims are going, and they have 70 camels, and so every 3 people ride on a camel. And so Abu Bakr was on a camel with Umar and Abdurrahman ibn Auf, and just sometimes I like the seerah just to close your eyes and to imagine things. It's like imagine like the Sahaba are going, and you see Abu Bakr, Umar, and Abdurrahman ibn Auf. It's got all-star team, right? 3 of them, right, on a camel going together. You have Hamza, you have Zayd ibn Haritha, and 2 of their servants who are taking turns. Right, they're on a camel. Right, the Prophet Muhammad sallam, Ali, and different narrations on who was the third. Some say it was Marthad ibn Ghanawi. Some say it was Abu Lubaba. Some say Abu Lubaba was back in charge of Medina. But nonetheless, and it could be both, where it started with Abu Lubaba, then he went back to Medina. Allahu Alam exactly. But the point is that 1 would ride and 2 would walk, and they would take these turns. And so the Prophet Muhammad sallam, when his term ends, then he's told by Ali and the other companion, he says, Ya Rasulullah, you stay on the horse. And the Prophet says, no, that I'm not any weaker than you, right? I'm as strong as you are, and I'm in the same need of reward as you. So we will take our turns properly. And so while this is happening and they're marching, and again, this is tiring. You're walking in a hot desert, right? And you don't have a horse. You have only 1/3 of the time you can be on a camel. And so now the Prophet Muhammad receives an update that Abu Sufyan learned. He moved the caravan, and actually Quraysh is coming, right? Imagine the mindset of the Sahaba. They think we're about to march, get some easy money, get this massive caravan, should probably be, a couple days, go back victorious. And now they hear it's not 30 to 40 people who are unarmed, it's 1,000 armed people, and they're coming out in full force. And so the Prophet Muhammad begins to consult the Sahaba and the companions. And some of them are actually reluctant to fight. So some of those Sahabi, they're like, Ya Rasulullah, we wanted the caravan. We didn't intend for battle. And Allah Azza wa Jal, and I encourage everyone, I said this yesterday to those who were in the talk, that Surah Al-Anfal, I believe right now, is one of the most important surahs for Muslims to say. It is such a phenomenal blueprint for how Muslims need to be thinking about our current state of war, right, with the Zionists, right, and actually with many other powers that are out there. Because Surah Al-Anfal it doesn't give you all the details of the battle, but it gives you the psyche at each moment in the battle. What is happening in the mindset of the Muslims? What is happening in the mindset of the non-Muslims? And it's just really a beautiful exposition of how to kind of psychologically prepare yourself and how Allah actually put them in a position to psychologically overcome their barriers, right, and to win the battle. So Allah explains this. He says, كَمَا أَخْرَجَكَ رَبُّكَ مِنْ بَيْتِكَ بِالْحَقِّ وَإِنَّ فَرِيقًا مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ لَكَارِهُونَ. The Prophet is telling them that Allah promised me, right, one of the two caravans, meaning one of the two groups. Meaning, look, we're going to get one of the two, either the caravan or we're going to get the enemy. And the Sahaba are like, Ya Rasulullah, like, we wanted the caravan. And the Prophet is saying, look, like let's move forward. And they're reluctant. So Allah is saying, look, just like we took you out of your house in truth, meaning we took you out of Medina, heading towards Badr in truth, but a group of your companions did not like it. Because the human nature is not to like battle. Right? So Allah says, كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الْقِتَالُ وَهُوَ كُرْهٌ لَكُمْ. Right? Fighting is prescribed upon you, and it's something you don't like. وَعَسَىٰ أَن تَكْرَهُ شَيْئًا, right? وَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ. But perhaps you dislike something, but it's good for you. وَاللَّهُ يَعْلَمُ وَأَنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ وَعَسَىٰ أَن تُحِبُّوا شَيْئًا وَهُوَ شَرٌّ لَكُمْ. The opposite true. Allah knows and you don't know. And then Allah continues, يُجَادِلُونَكَ فِي الْحَقِّ بَعْدَمَا تَبَيَّنَ كَأَنَّمَا يَسَاقُونَ إِلَى الْمَوْتِ وَهُمْ يَنظُرُونَ. That the Sahaba are human beings as well. They were terrified, some of them. And Allah says they argued with you about the truth after it had been made clear to them, as if they were being driven to death and they saw it. So they were like, I don't want to die. I don't want to die. And then Allah continues, وَإِذْ يَعِدُكُمُ اللَّهُ إِحْدَى الطَّائِفَتَيْنِ أَنَّهَا لَكُمْ. That the Prophet is telling them, I've been promised one of these two parties. And the Sahaba want, as we said, the caravan. So Allah said, وَتَوَدُّونَ أَنَّ غَيْرَ ذَاتِ الشَّوْكَةِ تَكُونَ لَكُمْ. And you, Sahaba, wish that the unarmed party was the one you would find. وَيُرِيدُ اللَّهُ أَن يُحِقَّ الْحَقَّ بِكَلِمَاتِهِ وَيَقْطَعَ دَابِرَ الْكَافِرِينَ. But Allah wishes to establish the truth in His words and to cut off, right, the power of the disbelievers. And so the Muhajirun, the Prophet consults and he says, Ashiru alayya ayyuhan nas, tell me what you guys want to do. Right? He doesn't want to force people into battle who are not ready for battle. And so then the Muhajirun start to speak up first. Abu Bakr says, Ya Rasulullah, we're with you. Umar says, Ya Rasulullah, we're with you. And then Miqdad ibn Aswad, right, he says the famous statement, he says, Ya Rasulullah, we will not say to you like the people of Musa said to him, Idhab anta wa rabbuka faqatila, inna hahuna qa'idun. We will not say to you like Musa's followers said to him, that we're going to sit here, you go and fight. We'll wait for you over here. That Ya Rasulullah, we're with you. So the Prophet is happy that, alhamdulillah, at least a good chunk of the Muslims want to fight. But that is the Muhajirun. And the Prophet knows that the Muhajirun were willing to die for him since day one. But when he came to Medina, and even in the pledge of Aqaba, the pledge was initially to protect the Prophet in Medina. It was not to go out and fight. That is one of the reasons why the Ansar were not even asked to come on the expeditions, because they were simply tasked with protecting the Prophet in Medina. So now it is a choice for them. Do you want to come out and fight or not? So the Prophet, he hears Abu Bakr, he hears Umar, he hears Miqdad, and he says again, give me your opinion, O people. So then Sa'ad ibn Mu'adh, right, he's smart, he says, Ya Rasulullah, it looks like you're looking to us, the Ansar, for our opinion. And the Prophet says, yes. So then he gives his famous speech where he says, Ya Rasulullah, he says, we have believed in you. I'll read you his whole speech because it's beautiful. He says, surely we believe in you and have been truthful to you. We bear witness that you have come with what you have come with is the truth. Thus we have given you our oath and covenant to hear and obey. So march forth, O messenger of God, wherever you wish. By the one who has sent you in truth, if you take us to the sea, we will indeed follow you into it. None of us shall stay behind. We will fight hard when war breaks out. We hope that Allah will show you a side of us that will please you. So continue with the blessing of Allah Azza wa Jal. So the Prophet Muhammad was so pleased now that both the Muhajirun and the Ansar were on board. And he marched forth, right, with the blessing of Allah, where he goes, Allah has promised me at one of the two groups. And then he began to tell them that so-and-so will die here and so-and-so will die there, to motivate them that it will be, inshallah, a good outcome. So now the Prophet Muhammad, he's continuing now that he realizes there's going to be a battle. So now he's not planning for the caravan. So he goes out with Abu Bakr Siddiq, radiallahu anhu, to go and do his own interrogation into who's the enemy, how many. He doesn't know how many they are, just know they're on their way. So he goes with Abu Bakr ahead, and they meet an old man who's there in the desert. And he asks this old man, he says, do you know what's going on with Muhammad and Quraysh? So he doesn't reveal who he is. He goes, I won't tell you anything unless you tell me who you want. He goes, I will tell you, he goes, I won't tell you anything until you tell me where you are from. Right? It's important, where you are from. So the Prophet says, alayhi salam, he goes, I will tell you where I'm from after you tell me what I've asked you. He goes, deal. So he says that I heard that Muhammad and his companions left on such and such date, and if my information is true, they would be camped over here. And I heard Quraysh left on such and such date, and if my information is true, they'll be camped over here. And then he says, okay, so now tell me who you are. And so the Prophet says, where are you from? He goes, we are from water, and he runs away quickly. Right? Like we're all made from water, right? And the guy's like, are you from the water of Iraq? Like which water, which land are you from? But the Prophet had already marched forth, right? And so now the Prophet realizes that the information is out. Quraysh knows where the Prophet is, right? Like they know what's going on. And so they quickly, right, prepare, right, before they may get ambushed. So then the Prophet Muhammad quickly sends Sa'ad, Ali, and Zubair ahead of the army, right? Because there are 300 people. It says, quickly go toward Badr and see what's going on. And they go forth and they find two boys. And they quickly grab these two boys and they bring them back to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And the Prophet says that, he starts interrogating them. And he says, what's going on, right? And they said, yeah, Quraysh is here. This is, where are they? He says, they're right behind that other side, right, of the dune. They're on the back side, right, of the sand dune behind Badr. And he says, how many are there? And he's like, I don't know. He goes, how many camels do they slaughter every day? He says, they slaughter 9 to 10 camels. It was okay, they're 900 to 1,000. So the Prophet Muhammad is realizing, okay, it's the whole army. He goes, who from Quraysh has come forth? And he's like, Abu Jahl, right, Utbah, Shayba, right, Walid. He starts naming off who comes. And then he goes to the companion, he says to them, he goes, this is Mecca. They have sent their dearest children to you. Meaning they have come out, right, in full force. So now they are, again, fully aware of the circumstances they're going to be dealing with, right? And so the Sahaba, now they move forth quickly and they get to Badr. And they begin to set up, the Prophet ﷺ sets up his camp. And as he's setting up the camp, he finds the first well, right, of Badr, and he sets up camp right next to that first well, so they have access to water. So a beautiful thing happens by the companion Hubab ibn Mundhir, radiallahu anh. He goes to the Prophet ﷺ and he asks a really delicately worded question. He says, Ya Rasulullah, is this place that you have decided to encamp, is it revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by which you cannot go in front or behind? Or is it your opinion and is it strategy of war? And he says to Hubab, he says, rather, this is not revelation, rather it is my opinion and it is war strategy. So then he says, Ya Rasulullah, this is not a suitable place to set up camp. Rather, we should move up our camp to the front of the wells so that we have access to all the water and Quraysh is cut off from all the water. And again, I want to start with, why did he ask this question like this? He didn't go and say, Ya Rasulullah, why are you here? Why don't you go there, right? He made sure to figure out, the Prophet, right? He speaks is often revelation. Some words are revelations, some words are his opinions, right? So before you're going to go and question what the Prophet is doing and trying to override his decision, you have to figure out whether it's wahi or not. So when he goes and he tells him that this is not wahi, now his Hubab says, I'm allowed to give my opinion. Because if it's wahi, right? If this is a decision of Allah, right, that is from revelation, right, then it's not for a Muslim to have any opinion, right, in that regard. So then Hubab says, let's move. And the Prophet ﷺ says, that's a great idea. And he moves the whole camp all the way to the front. And the Muslims set up their camp. And sure enough, they're on one side, right, of Badr, as the Quran calls it, Adna, and they're on Al-Quswa and Adna, the Muslims, right, and Quraysh. And then the Prophet actually sees Quraysh setting up their camp. And he sees Abu Jahl and his arrogance. And in fact, as they were coming to set up their camp on the way over, Abu Jahl even gets a friend of his from another tribe who says, hey, if you want, we'll send reinforcements. Abu Jahl's like, no, we're good to go. So Abu Jahl comes, right, and he sets up camp, and he's again, cheering everybody on, and they're coming with pride, right? They're coming with arrogance. And so then Allah reveals, in Surah Al-Anfal ayat about this, where he says, وَلَا تَكُونُوا كَالَّذِينَ خَرَجُوا مِنْ دِيَارِهِمْ بَطَرًا وَرِئَاءَ النَّاسِ وَيَصُدُّونَ عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ وَاللَّهُ بِمَا يَعْمَلُونَ مُحِيطٌ. That do not be like those who've come out of their houses in arrogance and pride and showing off for the people. Because that's how Quraysh came out. Again, it's like a party. You got singers, you have dancers, you have alcohol, you have camels. You think this is going to be, right, a huge party, and that you're overconfident. And so the Prophet Muhammad wants to, of course, keep the companions as humble, right, as possible. So first they set up the camp. Then Sa'd ibn Mu'adh, he comes and he tells the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ that I want to build for you a shed, an arish, so you can have a place to stay that's secure for your decision making. And in case we lose, you can get back to Medina safely. And the Prophet says, okay, you can build that shed for him. And the Prophet ﷺ will use that again during the battle and before. So now the armies, they're set up, and we head to the night before the battle. Check my time. Haven't started the battle yet, right? So we're good, right? And the night before, or the day before the battle, they're setting up their camp, and Quraysh begins to have their own doubts. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he sees the army, right, on the other side of the valley, and he says something to his companions. He says, if there's any good from them, right, if any good amongst people of Quraysh, then it's going to be with the person who's on that red camel. And he said, if they follow him, then they will be guided. And that man who was on the camel was Utbah ibn Rabi'ah, right, one of the leaders, right, of Quraysh. And as the Prophet ﷺ is saying this, right, he's saying this to his companions, right, Utbah, right, and around that same period of time, he goes to his people and he tells his people, listen to me, like, don't fight the Muslims. Even if you win, even if you kill them, you're not going to be happy, because now what's going to happen is every one of you is going to go back home and you're going to look at one another and say, this is a guy that killed my dad, and this is a guy that killed my son. And it's going to create even animosity in our own hearts. So we don't want to do this. It's not going to be good for us. So he goes, rather, put it all on me and let's turn back. So Utbah is now attempting to convince Quraysh in many ways. And Hakim ibn Hizam, one of the Sahabi he later converted, he narrates this, that Utbah was going around trying to convince Quraysh not to fight. And that's why the Prophet is saying, if they follow him, they will be guided. And then Quraysh is also realizing now that, man, there was that dream that Atika had, that march forth Quraysh for 3 days to your death. And so they're thinking about this, that is this going to come true? Then another man has a dream. And he tells the people that I had a dream that said, that in the dream, Utbah was killed, Shayba was killed, Abu Jahl was killed. So then Abu Jahl comes forth and he says again, we got another prophet, right? Right? You have this guy's prophecy. This prophecy goes, we will see, right, what is going to happen. And he again gives a very passionate speech, and Quraysh is like, fine. And even Utbah finally is like, okay, we're going to fight, right? So now Quraysh, like, their hearts are set, right, on fighting. And so we come to the night before the battle, and it's the 17th, night of Ramadan. The battle takes place in the day, and the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, whereas the Quraysh is in a state of pride, in arrogance, as Allah describes, وَإِذْ زَيَّنَهُمُ الشَّيْطَانُ أَعْمَالَهُم. The shaitan is beautifying for them, right, their deeds, and telling them, لَا غَالِبَ لَكُمُ الْيَوْمِ مِنَ النَّاسِ, and they're being kind of put in their hearts that, like, no one can overpower you, right? This false sense of arrogance, that's on one side. On the other side, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, right, is deep in dua, right? He is deep in qiyam, right? And then he's even telling the companions again, he's like, look, there's Badr. So-and-so will die here, so-and-so will die there, so-and-so will die there. And he's pointing this out. And Umar narrates, he says that I swear by Allah, every single place a Prophet pointed to and said so-and-so will die, right? We saw that person dead there, right, the following day. And now we get, I guess, the night before, and you would imagine, Sahaba were reluctant to go into battle. And you would think you're 300 versus 1,000. They're armed, you're not fully armed, right? They're prepared, you're not fully prepared. You've been marching for 5 days, you're tired. You would think you'd be anxious, right? SubhanAllah, before we have an exam, right? Before we have any, like a job interview, how anxious are you, right? You don't sleep well at night, right? You got to go to the bathroom, you have this, you have that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to change the predicament of the Muslims. So rather than having any anxiety, right, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that night sent down a gentle rain and made them feel incredibly drowsy. And Allah said in Surah Al-Anfal, إِذْ يُغَشِّيكُمُ النُّعَاسَ أَمْنَةً مِّنْهُ وَيُنَزِّلُ عَلَيْكُم مِّنَ السَّمَاءِ مَاءً لِيُطَهِّرَكُم بِهِ وَيُذْهِبَ عَنكُم رِجْزَ الشَّيْطَانِ وَلِيَرْبِطَ عَلَى قُلُوبِكُم وَيُثَبِّتَ بِهِ الْأَقْدَامِ. Where Allah said, and remember when Allah sent upon you drowsiness from Him, and then He dropped down from the sky rain to you. For what reason? So it would purify you and remove the impurities of shaitan, and that it would solidify your hearts and make your feet firm. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gifted the Muslims with that drowsiness and that rain for a number of reasons. He said physically purify them, spiritually purify them, right? And then to make them fall into a deep state of slumber. And then during that night, as they're sleeping, Allah did something else. Because remember, the Muslims were worried that they're way outnumbered. You've now been told there's a 3-to-1 ratio. And so Allah in their dream, right, He says, وَإِذْ يُرِيكَهُمُ اللَّهُ فِي مَنَامِكَ قَلِيلًا. Some say this is for the Prophet ﷺ, some say it refers to the companions as well, could be, but at least it's for one of them. That remember when Allah made them appear few to you in your dream. So you're sleeping, and in your dream you're in a deep sleep, that now you envision the army as actually very few. And Allah says, وَلَوْ أَرَاكَهُمْ كَثِيرًا لَفَشِلْتُمْ وَلَا تَنَازَعْتُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ سَلَّمَ. Imagine they went to bed at night, and they saw the enemy as huge and large. Now what's going to happen? They're going to get up, and they're going to have doubts. They're going to say, maybe we shouldn't fight. So Allah is saying, had we made them large to you in our dreams, had we made them appear many in number, you would have lost hope, you would have lost courage, and you would have begun to dispute. So Quraysh is disputing, and the Muslims are not disputing. وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ سَلَّمَ. Allah has spared you of that. إِنَّهُ عَلِيمٌ بِذَاتِ الصُّدُورِ. Indeed, Allah is knowing of that which is in the hearts. And I'll bring this back to Gaza later, but again, in the importance of us not over-exaggerating the strength of our enemy, is what Allah is trying to teach us here. We'll come back to that, inshallah. So we get now to the morning of the battle. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is not fasting. He told the companions not to fast. And again, this comes back to the idea of Ramadan and what do we do in Ramadan. Ramadan, even though it is a time of worship and a time of spirituality, the Prophet chose. He didn't have to. He could have said, this is Ramadan. Let us enjoy our Taraweeh. Let us enjoy our fasting. Let us enjoy our Quran. He chose to break the fast, go out for the caravan, and now for battle. No Taraweeh, right? They're not sitting there reciting Quran all day long. And they woke up before Quraysh, and they still took the means. They took the means to set themselves up for victory. So as the sun rose, if anyone's been out at any time, right, and if you're looking right into the sun, it is very hard for you to see in front of you clearly. So he positioned the army that the sun was behind them and that Quraysh would have to face the sun. It's a small little thing, but you want to always take every little endeavor to put yourself in a situation to win. And then the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he gave glad tidings. He said, Abshir ya Abu Bakr, right? And then he began to encourage the Sahaba again and he said, by the one who has Muhammad's soul in his hand, you will not fight a man today who, if you are killed while being patient and anticipating the reward, and you don't run away, that you will enter into paradise. And then he began to line up the army. And lining up the army was something actually strange in Arabia. Normally it was just an army and you run forth and it's just wild combat. So the Prophet did something which was abnormal, where he lined everybody up and he first put the people with spears in the front, then he put the archers behind them, then he put those right with the swords behind them. And he gave them very explicit instructions. He said, first, wait and see if they come forth, then let the people with spears attack those on the horses. Then he says that as they come forth, let the archers, pick off those who are coming forth, and then only pull out and unsheath your swords when the army draws near. So he didn't want chaos. And so the Prophet is lining up the army, and we get the famous story where he has actually an arrow, and he's using the arrow to poke people to stay straight in the line. And one of the companions, right, Sawad, is a little bit out of line. And perhaps purposely he steps out of line. And so the Prophet ﷺ has to poke him, right, to push him back into the line. He says, Ya Rasulullah, you hit me. Right? And so he goes, well, okay, whatever, okay, fine, I hit you. He's like, I want to get you back, right? Tit for tat, right? So the Prophet said, okay. And of course, in their battle, right, they're not wearing a whole lot of clothes, right? His stomach was exposed when he got poked. So the Prophet exposed his stomach so he could get poked back. And then, Sawad grabs the Prophet ﷺ, right, kisses him, puts his skin on his skin. The Prophet says, why did you do that? He goes, I wanted the last thing that happened to me was that I get your blessing and that my skin touched your skin, right? If this is the last that I see, right? But again, the point I want to make here is that the Prophet's discipline, it might not seem like a big deal. Like you're standing in line and one person is out of line. But it's a minor thing about sabr, right? And about istiqamah and about itqan in perfection in every little thing we do. That it really had probably no impact on the battle, but the Prophet wants his companions to be cognizant of everything we do, right? We do it as perfectly as we can and to not tolerate even these little errors, because little errors, right, they can manifest. Which is why even in salah, right, we want to line up very, very carefully to express, right, that discipline that we're supposed to have. And so this is all happening before, and right before the battle ensues, right, Abu Jahl, right, they believe in Allah, but they worship the idols kind of to get to Allah. He gets up and he makes his own dua. And he says, Allahumma, he says, oh Allah, whoever of these two parties is more guilty of severing the ties of kinship and is more beloved to you, right, then give them victory, right? Give the one who you love victory and destroy those who have severed the ties of kinship, right? So he's making his own dua, right? And the Prophet Muhammad goes to his arish, right, before the battle ensues, the tent, the shed, and he begins to put up his hands, and his outer cloak is on, and he begins to, in a loud voice, make dua. He says, Allahumma ayna ma wa'adtani. Oh Allah, where is what you have promised me? Allahumma anjiz li ma wa'adtani. Right? Oh Allah, fulfill for me what you have promised me. Allahumma innaka in tuhlik hadihi al-usba. Right? Oh Allah, if you allow this group that is here to be destroyed, falan tu'bad, fala tu'bad fil ardi abada. Then you will not be worshipped. Meaning the Muslims die. Who's left after the Muslims? And so he's making dua over and over and over, and long dua. And Abu Bakr, and his clothes and his outer garment falls off. And Abu Bakr picks it back up and he says to the Prophet, Ya Rasulullah, don't worry, Allah will answer your dua. Allah will answer your dua. Then he turns and he looks at Quraysh. And he says, oh Allah, look at Quraysh. They've come out in their arrogance, in their pride. Right? They reject you. They challenge you. They rejected your Prophet. Oh Allah, support us today. And then he takes a handful of dirt and sand from the ground. He throws it and he says, oh Allah, allow it to hit their faces. And of course, Allah allows that dust to enter into the eye of every single person in Quraysh. And Allah reveals the ayat about this. So first he reveals Abu Jahl's response to his dua. That Abu Jahl said, oh Allah, give us victory, give us a fath. And Allah says, in tastaftihu faqad ja'akum al-fath. Kind of mocking Quraysh. That if you seek victory from Allah, then indeed victory has come, but it's gone to Muhammad. And the last part, وَلَن تُغْنِيَ عَنْكُمْ فِئَتُكُمْ شَيْئًا وَلَوْ كَثُرَتْ. That no matter how large your number gets, it will not avail you. وَأَنَّ اللَّهَ مَعَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. For indeed Allah is with the believers. And then when the Prophet, so Abu Jahl's dua is rejected, and the Prophet's dua is accepted, and Allah says, إِذْ تَسْتَغِيثُونَ رَبَّكُمْ فَاسْتَجَابَ لَكُمْ أَنِّي مُمِدُّكُمْ بِأَلْفٍ مِّنَ الْمَلَائِكَةِ مُرْدِفِينَ. Allah says, recall when you implored your Lord, when you begged your Lord, and your Lord supported you by sending down 1,000 angels. وَمَا جَعَلَهُ اللَّهُ إِلَّا بُشْرَى وَلِتَطْمَئِنَّ بِهِ قُلُوبُكُمْ وَمَا النَّصْرُ إِلَّا مِنْ عِنْدِ اللَّهِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ عَزِيزٌ حَكِيمٌ. And all of that, of Allah sending down those angels that we'll see in a few moments, was done to make the believers' hearts at peace, and victory is only from Allah. And so when the Prophet then threw that dust, entered into all their eyes, and Allah revealed in Al-Anfal, says, فَلَمْ تَقْتُلُوهُمْ وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ قَتَلَهُمْ وَمَا رَمَيْتَ إِذْ رَمَيْتَ وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ رَمَى. That it's not you, O companions, who killed the enemy, but it was Allah who caused them to die. It's not you, Muhammad, who threw when you threw, meaning it's not you who caused that dust to hit their eyes, but it was Allah who caused that dust to hit their eyes. And Allah gives the believers a good test with that. So those are the last few things that happen before the battle begins. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when the two armies are staring at each other, front to front, Allah now manifests even more for them. SubhanAllah. Those who, I've been going down this rabbit hole for a while about perception and sight. And it's just a fascinating field about how the things we see are actually not actually, like, it's not, what we see is actually a perception of what our brains have come up with, which is why two people can see the exact same thing, but they perceive two very different things. And so as the Muslims are on the battle, and they're staring at the non-Muslims, and the non-Muslims are staring at the Muslims, Allah says, إِذْ يُرِيكُمُوهُمْ إِذَا الْتَقَيْتُمْ فِي أَعْيُنِكُمْ قَلِيلًا وَيُقَلِّلُكُمْ فِي أَعْيُنِهِمْ. He does two things. So the night before, when you slept, you saw them as few, so you would wake up with some courage. Now you go to the battlefield, but what if you saw them now as the real deal? Like, okay, hold on, I dreamt they were small, but they're actually a lot. So Allah says, and when you met them on the battlefield, we made them appear small, few to you in your eyes, and we also made you look small to them in your eyes. So you're only 300, we made them look like less. Why did Allah do this? لِيَقْضِيَ اللَّهُ أَمْرًا كَانَ مَفْعُولًا. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants this to go down. He does not want Quraysh to pull out at the last minute. He does not want the Muslims to pull out in the last minute. He wants this to come to fruition. And so both sides are looking there saying, this group looks small. And they are ready to go. And that's when Shaitan is telling them, look, they look so few. Right? And then eventually, of course, when Shaitan realizes what's going on, right, he's going to pull back. So think about that boldness. So one of the people from Quraysh, Al-Aswad ibn Makhzumi, he gets really bold before the battle. He's like, I'm going to go and I'm going to drink from the water that the Muslims have, and I'm going to go poison that water as well. One guy is going to go by himself into the army's camp, right? So he tries to go into the camp, and he sees Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib. Hamza slices off one of his legs, and he's bleeding. right? And he's like limping. He's like still trying to go to the water. And then Hamza finishes him off, right? So he's the first person who dies actually before the battle even begins. And then the battle began, and this is common in some of the battles of the Prophet ﷺ in Arabian history, is that they would not start with the two armies going, but there would be a call out, where there would be like certain warriors would step forth, and they would sword fight against the other side. So Quraysh sends forth three of their most famous. They send forth Utbah and Shayba, who are two brothers, right? And they send forth Walid, the son of Utbah. So three of the leaders of Quraysh. And so three young people from the Ansar, they step forth. And then the Prophet ﷺ calls them back. So no, you guys go back. They're going to send forth their best. We're going to send forth some of our best. So he sends forth Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib. He sends forth Ali ibn Abi Talib, and he sends forth Ubaidah ibn Harith, the same one who went on that first Sariyah. And they engage in this one-on-one duel. And so Hamza quickly kills Shayba, Ali kills Al-Walid, and Utbah and actually Ubaidah, they actually strike one another. So after each has been struck, then Ali and Hamza end up killing Utbah, and Ubaidah gets taken back to the Muslim camp, where he'll eventually succumb to his wounds and he will die. But that's how the war began. So two out of the three were immediately killed, and the third was killed shortly after. So now the Muslims are like, alhamdulillah, we killed their three of their best soldiers, and they're very confident, and Quraysh goes kind of wild. Like, man, how could this happen? So they lack discipline. So instead of them being disciplined like the Muslims are, they rush into the battle, right? They just kind of grab their swords, grab their horses, they start running towards the battle. And the Muslim slogan during the battle is Ahadun Ahad. And they begin to just patiently pick them apart, right? There's 1,000 of them coming, and the archers in particular are taking out those who are marching forward. And the Prophet begins to encourage them. And he says, "Qumu ila jannatin arduha ka'ardi samawati wal ard." He says, rise and go and fight to a garden that is wider than the heavens and the earth. So one Sahabi, he hears this, right? And the story is very famous, right? Where he hears this and he's like, Ya Rasulullah, really? Like really, it's wider than the heavens and the earth? The Prophet says, it is. So he pulls out a bag of dates and he's like, man, if I was to eat these dates, right, I'd have lived too long of a life. So he throws a bag of dates down and he rushes into the battle. And as he's running and he's fighting, he actually is reciting poetry, right? And he says, رَقْضًا إِلَى اللَّهِ بِغَيْرِ زَادٍ إِلَّا التُّقَى وَعَمَلِ الْمَعَادِ وَالصَّبْرُ فِي اللَّهِ عَلَى الْجِهَادِ وَكُلُّ زَادٍ عُرْضَةٌ النَّفَادِ غَيْرَ التُّقَى وَالْبِرِّ وَالرَّشَادِ. Right? It's beautiful dua. He says that, we're running forth, right, with towards Allah with no other provisions except for taqwa and deeds for the hereafter, right? Patience for the sake of Allah upon jihad. And every other provision, right, is going to be destroyed, meaning like all of the provisions will come to an end except for taqwa and righteousness and guidance. And he fought and fought until, right, he was martyred. So the Sahaba are hearing this. And again, how motivating is that? Like someone is fighting, this is how they're kind of fighting, right, to the last breath. And so as all of this is going along, right, and the Muslims are fighting tough and they're winning the battle in the beginning, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends down the malaika. And he reveals in Surah Al-Anfal, إِذْ يُوحِي رَبُّكَ إِلَى الْمَلَائِكَةِ أَنِّي مَعَكُمْ فَثَبِّتُوا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. He tells the angels, and remember when Allah revealed to the angels that I am with them, so support them, right? Support those who believe. So أُلْقِي فِي قُلُوبِ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا الرُّعْبَ فَاضْرِبُوا فَوْقَ الْأَعْنَاقِ وَاضْرِبُوا مِنْهُمْ كُلَّ بَنَانٍ. So support the believers, and I will strike terror into the hearts of the disbelievers. So strike them above their necks and strike them at every fingertip. And so the Sahaba, imagine they're running and they're fighting, and they're commenting that as we're fighting the battle and they're about to pull out their sword, they look up to the sky above them and they see an angel. And that angel is saying, Aqdim ya Hayzum, like go forth. They're calling the horse's name is Hayzum. And that horse will go strike the non-Muslim in the head right before the Muslim can get him. And the Muslims will actually, in the battle, they went back to the Prophet. They said, Ya Rasulullah, like, are you seeing what I'm seeing? And the Prophet is saying, Sadaqta, like this is help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I just want to comment that Jibreel alayhi salam came down, and some of the angels dressed and looking like Zubair ibn Awam, the great Sahabi. He was one of the two who had a horse in the battle. He was one of the companions who was ambidextrous. He could fight with two swords. And so Zubair was there, handling business. And imagine the honor that Jibreel is coming down wearing, it's like, I'm going to look like Zubair in the battle, right? And so Zubair actually sees a man, and he goes to that man. I'll give you his name, his full name. And that man is covered in head to toe in body armor, where literally only his eye can be seen. So Zubair ibn Awam, he takes a spear, right? And he throws the spear at that guy, nails him right in the eye, right, and he kills him. Right? And then that spear, just so you know, like the Prophet ﷺ, he kept that spear until he died. That Abu Bakr kept that spear until he died. Umar kept the spear until he died. Then it was, and Uthman kept it until he died. Then it was with Ali ibn Abi Talib's family until finally his son, right, Abdullah ibn Zubair ibn Awam asked for it and it stayed with him. So this spear is very, very famous. So the Muslims are going, right, and they're fighting and inflicting all this damage. And while this is happening, and Abdurrahman ibn Auf, he sees two boys next to him, two teenage men, and they tell Abdurrahman ibn Auf, they said that, oh, uncle, right? It's finally on the battlefield, they call you uncle, right? Uncle, right? They don't know who he is. Uncle, do you know who Abu Jahl is? He's like, yeah, I know who Abu Jahl is. What do you want to know about Abu Jahl? And so one teenage boy, right? So there's two of them to his side. The first one says this. He goes, I swear to God, I'm not leaving until one of us is dead, right? Either he's dead or I'm dead. And then the other boy whispers them the exact same thing. So these two boys have their eyes set on killing Abu Jahl. And so as the battle is going on, Abdurrahman ibn Auf, he sees Abu Jahl and he goes to them. He goes, you know the guy you're asking about? He's right there. So those two boys, they go and they attack Abu Jahl and they both strike Abu Jahl and he's fallen on the ground. Right? He's not dead yet. We'll speak about that, but he is pretty much taken out of the battle. So Zubair, as I mentioned, he comes and he kills the man. His name is Ubaidah ibn Sa'id ibn al-As. And again, just Qadr is fascinating, but Zubair, he kills the guy who in the future, his son and Sa'id ibn al-As, right, who's a Sahabi, right, who ended up becoming a famous governor of Kufa, a famous Sahabi who was involved with writing of the Quran by Uthman. Just think about it. His son, right, and Ubaidah's father will be working together to put the Quran together, right? Qadr. On the battlefield, right, they're fighting and their offspring, right, will be together in putting the Quran together. So this is happening in the battle, right? The Muslims are winning. And then, subhanAllah, again, the angels are supporting the believers. And another incident happens. And in this incident, Abbas, radiallahu anh, is captured. And again, he's not a Muslim at this time, or he's not publicly a Muslim at least. And it's a tiny, short, stocky Sahabi from the Ansar. He captures one of the greatest warriors of Quraysh, Abbas ibn Abdul Muttalib. So none of us would like to be captured if we're a big warrior by a short, stocky fighter, right? It's like an affront to your masculinity. So Abbas, he comes with the Prophet, he's captured, right? And he tells the Prophet ﷺ, he says, Ya Rasulullah, right? And he says Rasulullah because he claims that he'll claim that he's Muslim, right? He says, Ya Rasulullah, I swear to God, this guy didn't capture me, right? Right? He goes, rather it was some other like really handsome man, right? Who had really nice parted hair on a spotted horse. He's the guy who captured me, right? And then the Sahabi's like, Ya Rasulullah, I captured him, right? And the Prophet says, Uskut, like shut up, right? فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ أَيَّدَكَ بِمَلَكٍ كَرِيمٍ. Be quiet, for indeed it was Allah who supported you to capture him with a noble angel, right? So the man did his part, but Allah supported him, right, with the angel to capture someone like Abbas. So the battle is slowly, coming to an end, and Quraysh is beginning to run away. And a few other things happen that I want to mention as we come towards the close of the battle, which is that we mentioned there were certain people who were cowardly. Amongst them was Umayyah. He knew he was going to die, right? So he was so scared that the battle is coming to an end. Quraysh is still scrambling. He quickly goes and he gives up. He goes and finds another friend of his. So he finds the great companion Abdurrahman ibn Auf, radiallahu anh, and he goes and he used to have a long friendship with him in Jahiliyyah. So when Abdurrahman converted and he changed his name to Abdurrahman, Umayyah told him, I don't know who Ar-Rahman is, right? I don't recognize Ar-Rahman, so I'm not going to call you that. So they agreed that I'll call you Abdul Ilah. I'll call you, servant of the God, right? So on the battlefield, he sees Abdurrahman ibn Auf, and he's like, Abdul Ilah, right? And he finds, Abdurrahman, and he says, Abdurrahman is carrying like some armor he's captured, right? He's, it's a spoil of war. And the war is coming to an end, the battle. And he's like, how about I give you something better, right, than that, what you're carrying? He's like, what? He's like, you can have me and my son, right? Take us as captives and ransom us off, right? So he's like, great deal for me, right? Umayyah is going to catch a very large ransom. So he drops his armor and he takes Umayyah and he takes his son, one hand each, and he's marching forward. What happens? We said the slogan of the Muslims was Ahadun Ahad, right? Ahadun Ahad. Who said that? Whose slogan was that before? Bilal. So who sees Umayyah ibn Khalaf? Bilal ibn Rabah. He's like, over my dead body. Right? He says, man najawtu in najah, right? I will not be saved if he is saved. He's like, you are not going to keep this guy secure. He's like, he's my captive, right? Abdul Rahman was a businessman, those of you know, right? He moved to Mecca, to Medina. He's a muhajir. Got a brother quickly. The brother told him, hey, I'll give you half my wealth. I have 2 wives. I'll divorce one. I'll give them to you. He's like, I don't need anything. Just tell me where the market is. Comes back in a few days. He gets married. The guy's broke. He gets married. Prophet's like, well, what's going on, right? He's like, I did some business. So he's very good at business. So he, in his mind, was like, this armor versus Umayyah and his son. Let me go trade that. So now he's like, come on, Bilal. No. So Bilal, he creates a scene. And he tells the Ansar, he tells everybody, oh my God, do you know who he's here? This is Umayyah ibn Khalaf. This is the leader of the disbelievers. We got to get him. So Abdul Rahman tells Umayyah and his son, he's like, get down. He's like, I'll protect you. And he's like shielding them. And they take their swords and they start stabbing actually Umayyah ibn Khalaf and his son. And even Abdul Rahman got hit because he was trying to, he's like, he wants his money, right? It's like, he puts his foot out, everything, his foot gets stabbed. But Umayyah ibn Khalaf actually is killed right at that moment, right, by Bilal, right, and those companions. We'll talk about later. Umayyah was the only person of the mushrikeen who was not buried in the battle because Allah willed for his body to essentially disintegrate because he used to put Bilal on the hot coal, on the hot sand. So the hot sand essentially disintegrated his body so they could not pick it up and throw it into the well. So as the battle comes to an end, 70 of Quraysh is killed, 70 from Quraysh is captured, and from the Muslims, only 14 are martyred. 6 of those are from the Muhajirun, 8 from the Ansar. None of them are extremely well-known companions. If you go to Badr to this day, right, you will see, that there's a huge kind of landmark where you'll see the names of all those shuhada. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ begins to take the bodies, and they stay and they camp there for 3 days. That was the norm of the Prophet ﷺ after all the battles. They would spend 3 days encamped. This is for a number of reasons. It was to bury their shuhada. It was also to sometimes bury the disbelievers if they were there. It was to distribute and capture the spoils of war. It was to be ready in case the enemy came back. It was to give the army a rest, right? They'd been marching for 5 days and fighting. And it was also to do further investigation. Who died, right? Want to make sure if the leaders died or not. So then the Prophet ﷺ, as the battle comes to an end, he calls out to the companions. He goes, where's Abu Jahl? I want to see his dead body, essentially, right? So they go and they start looking through all the bodies. And Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, right, the skinny, small companion, he sees Abu Jahl lying on the ground, like last moments of his life. And he begins to talk to him. And he's like, tells him, like, look at what's happened to you. You've been humiliated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Abu Jahl is saying, like, oh, how have I been humiliated? I've just been killed. I'm just like a man from my men. And he begins to, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud kind of rebuke him. And then he steps on his hand, takes out the sword that Abu Jahl had, and he finally kills him. And he goes back to the Prophet ﷺ and says, Ya Rasulullah, I took care of him. And he goes, do you swear to God, right, that you've killed him, right? He's like, I swear to Allah. He goes, show me his body. So he goes and stands over Abu Jahl, right? And he says to the people who are there, everyone sees his dead body, and he says that this is the Fir'aun, right, of this ummah, right? Then he takes those dead bodies of all of the people of Quraysh, and he starts to throw them into all the different wells that are at Badr. And as he's throwing them into the wells, right, he's speaking to them. And so he tells them, he says, هَلْ وَجَدْتُمْ مَا وَعَدَكُمْ رَبُّكُمْ حَقًّا? That have you seen what your Lord has promised to you to be true? Have you found what your Lord has promised to you to be true? And he goes, إِنِّي وَجَدْتُ مَا وَعَدَنِي رَبِّي حَقًّا. That I have found what my Lord has promised me to be true. So Umar ibn Khattab and the Sahaba are kind of like, this is a strange sight. You got 70 dead bodies, and they're being thrown into a well, and the Prophet is talking to them. And he said, Ya Rasulullah, like, why are you talking to dead bodies? And the Prophet said that by the one whose hand is my soul, that they don't hear me any less than you're hearing me right now. And so the ulama spoke about this man. Some said that it was a miracle, specifically for the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. But other ulama, amongst them Ibn Taymiyyah and other great scholars, said that the dead can hear. There's a lot of evidence for that. This is why we go to the graveyard. We say, Assalamu alaikum, ya Assalamu alaikum, ya diyar. And there's many other narrations about when the dead, you walk away, they hear your footsteps. So one group of scholars say that the dead can hear. Another group say that no, they cannot hear, right? And Aisha and the Hanafis are amongst those who say they don't hear. But anyway, so now the Prophet ﷺ is kind of finishing off the battle aspect, and now he's going through, and he's figuring out what is going on. And few things happen. A lot of things happen. So number one is, subhanAllah, these are the best of the companions. But I want you to remember, why did they want to fight the caravan in the first place? They wanted it for economic reasons. The Muhajirun were poor, and even the Ansar did not have a lot of money, right? The Muslims were struggling financially to set up their state. Muhajirun were still living with the Ansar, right? It was a tough financial circumstances. So they went out for the purpose of gaining money, one of them. Now they fight this battle, and now they're going to come across a whole lot of spoils of war. And so the first thing they begin to do is argue amongst one another over the spoils of war. And remember, there's no laws that have been passed down yet. So it just, okay, what are the rules? There's no rules. So some of the companions who were in the front lines, and there was those who were in the back lines, they start arguing. Because those who were in the front, they got more of the spoils. And those who were in the back, they didn't get the spoils. It's like, well, why? We should get the spoils. It was like, we were the ones who attacked. But then the other ones were like, well, we were the ones who were behind you to support. And so they start bickering. And then other narrations where the Sahaba begin to ask Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, he tells the Prophet, Ya Rasulullah, can I have this sword that I found? So the Prophet says, return it, for I have not been, return it. And he asks again, Ya Rasulullah, can I have the shield? The Prophet says, return it, for I have not been given any news about it. And so then the ayat come down about the spoils of war and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to remind the companions that, يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْأَنْفَالِ قُلْ الْأَنْفَالُ اللَّهِ وَرَسُولُهُ فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ وَأَصْلِحُوا ذَاتَ بَيْنِكُمْ وَأَطِيعُوا اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ إِن كُنتُم مُؤْمِنِينَ. And the ayat come down saying, you know what? Leave the spoils of war. They are for Allah and His Messenger, right? Your job is focus on your iman and your taqwa, right? This is your job. Spoils of war will be distributed in accordance with how Allah wants, but stop worrying about the money. And this is a lesson from Anfal we'll come back to, is that to remove the focus on don't overemphasize the worldly means, right? In whether it be the number of your army, the weapons that you have, right? Or anything else. And so the ayat will come down about this. We'll come to that. The second thing that comes up that's important is what to do with the captives. And so the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ begins to talk to the companions and make sure, again, he says, what do you guys want to do with these captives? They have 70 of them. So Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, he tells the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he says, Ya Rasulullah, I think we should ransom them. Again, goes back to money. And the other companions are like, ransom them, because we'll get a whole lot of money if you ransom off 70 people. So then Umar comes and he says, Ya Rasulullah, I don't think so. I think that every single one of us should get our family member and kill our family member. So he says Ali should take his cousin or his relative, and so on and so forth. So this way everyone knows that we're business. And then Abdullah ibn Rawaha, he says, Ya Rasulullah, let's gather them all together and let's burn them all. Right? So the companions are going back and forth. But the majority of the voices, they support Abu Bakr. If you kill them, you get no money. And the companions, right, there's a lot of money to be had here. So then the Prophet says to Abu Bakr, he says to all of them, he says, Allah has made some hearts softer than milk and some hearts that are very hard like rocks. And he says, Abu Bakr, your heart is soft. You're like Isa and Ibrahim, right? How, you would speak that, if Allah forgives, then even if you disobey, Allah is forgiving. And Omar, like you've been made, much stronger, right? So this is happening. And then he goes with the position of Abu Bakr. And the next day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals ayat to redirect the Prophet and say, you should have actually killed the captives. And that also comes in Surah Al-Anfal. What is the ayah? Yeah, no. Yeah, وَمَا كَانَ لِنَبِيٍّ أَن يَكُونَ لَهُ أَسْرَىٰ حَتَّىٰ يُثْخِنَ فِي الْأَرْضِ. Right? It is not befitting for a prophet that he has captives until he has shed much blood in the land. Right? That you want the glitter of this life, but Allah wants for you the akhirah. So the Prophet is crying with Abu Bakr, and Umar goes and says, Ya Rasulullah, why are you crying so I can cry? And he tells them, but then Allah continues to reveal the ayat that says that it's halal for you to move forth with what you have decided. What you did was good, you could have done that which is better. The Prophet now has 70 captives. What is he going to do? Some of the captives, he's going to let go for this nothing, the goodwill of his heart. Other captives, he says that you can teach 10 kids how to read and write, and then you're free to go. Other captives, he executes. So he goes to 2 of them in particular. He goes to Uqba, and he goes to An-Nadr ibn Harith, 2 really huge enemies of Islam. An-Nadr ibn Harith was famous for pretty much trying to block dawah wherever he could. So his job was he would travel the Arabian Peninsula, he would go to Persia, he would go to other lands, he would learn about all their folklore, all their stories of battles and so on and so forth. And whenever the Prophet ﷺ would recite the Quran and tell the stories to the people of Quraysh, he would interrupt. And he would say that Muhammad has stories, I have stories too. And he goes, Muhammad is not a better storyteller than I am. So he made it his point to constantly interrupt the dawah and to really be kind of a thorn. And also, physically aggress against some of the companions. And Uqba did the same. So then the Prophet ﷺ went to Uqba, and Uqba heard that he was given the order to be killed, and he goes to the Prophet and he pleads, why don't you just give me the same ruling as everybody else, let me be ransomed. The Prophet said, no, right? Your animosity towards Allah and His Messenger are more intense, so for you is the fire. And he ordered one of the companions to behead him, essentially. Then he goes to another Ibn al-Harith, and the exact same thing happens. Ali ibn Abi Talib, he beheads another Ibn al-Harith. So 2 of those are beheaded, and the rest of them are to be ransomed. And even amongst the ransom, there is quite a bit that is worth speaking about. So one of the things that happens is that he goes to Al-Abbas, when he got captured by the great, by that little Sahabi. And so he goes to Abbas and he says to him that, okay, you need to pay a heavy ransom, not only for yourself, but for your family members who are captive. And he says, Ya Rasulullah, I'm a Muslim. He says, Allah knows whether you're Muslim or not, but you have apparently fought us, so you got to pay a ransom. He goes, Ya Rasulullah, I have no money. He goes, okay, what about when you and Fadl, what about you and your wife, right? Before you left on your trip, you buried a whole bunch of money and you told her that if I don't come back from my trip, then distribute this money amongst my 3 sons, right? Al-Fadl, right? Abdullah, right? And Quthab, right? So he has to give it to his 3 kids. So now Abbas is like, I mean, his heart knew, right? And he was soft towards the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He facilitated, right? The pledge of Aqaba. He said, like, he's like, I know you're the messenger of God, essentially, right? This is obviously a clear fact that he says, no one knew about this, sort of me and my wife. So then he goes, okay, at least count the 70 ounces of silver that were taken from me in spoils of war towards my ransom. And he says, no, that's the spoils of war. You need to pay the full bounty, essentially, right? So then he paid the full bounty, and then Abbas, he was able to go back, and of course he converted and came back to Medina, right, shortly after. Another person who was amongst the captive was the Prophet ﷺ's own son-in-law, right, who was married to Zainab. And so now the Prophet ﷺ has his son-in-law, who was actually very noble, that when he, when Zainab, became Muslim, and when the Prophet ﷺ was giving dawah, Quraysh begged him to divorce Zainab, and that they would marry him and honor him in all kinds of ways. And he refused, because he was just a good person. So even though he fought, the Prophet said, okay, you know what, pay your ransom. So his daughter sends the ransom for her husband, and in that ransom is a necklace that she was gifted by Khadija on her wedding night. So imagine the Prophet sees that, right? He's like, okay, like my daughter lost, like, her pretty much her gift from her mom. And so then he asked the companions that, will you allow him to go and return back return back the gift, or return back the ransom. So the Prophet, they give that to him. Then he goes and he tells, his son-in-law, he says, send Zainab, secretly he whispers that, send Zainab now back to Medina to meet with me. And so he would try to facilitate it, but the first time she tried to leave, Quraysh attacked, and she actually had a miscarriage. She was pregnant, and the second time she was actually able to go. So there's more stuff that happens, but I know I need to end because of time. But with that comes and really an end to the battle. The Prophet ﷺ sent ahead some of the companions. They went back and gave the glad tidings. So imagine how the Muslims are in the Ramadan. It's the 12th. Everyone is gone. They come back, the last 10 nights, essentially, right? The battle is 17th. If it ends, they stay 3 days, 18, 19, 20. They probably come back 23, 24, however many days. For the very last few days of Ramadan, they come back with this good news. And alhamdulillah, right? That is the aftermath of Badr, and of course more and more occurs. But I want to stop because I need to bring this back to Gaza. So how much time do we have total?
Like 30 more minutes?
Yeah, we got 30 minutes. Okay, good. So we said 10, I got 10 total. I was like, okay, good. I'm good. So I'll stop for a moment, take a break. I have said a lot. We can take questions, and then inshallah we'll merge into now how does this map onto what is happening in Gaza, and essentially kind of what's the next steps with this, inshallah. So we have questions here.
Chronologically, was this the first year that Ramadan was mandated?
It was. So this, I want,
The same year.
exact same year. So I want you to imagine, they fast Ramadan, their first fast occurs, 12 days later, the Muslims leave. So I want you to think about, how we're saying this year, our Ramadan is very somber, right? Solemn. There's a war happening. There is a lot for us to connect with the people of Medina at this time. They were feeling the exact same thing. They didn't know what was going on. All they know is that 300 of their men left for battle, and they have no idea what's going on. And so think about the quality of their Ramadan. Were they having lavish iftars? Right? They were just in a very different state of mind, right? So yeah, it was a very first Ramadan. Yeah.
Is that the aspect of the angels participating in the battle. There are many scholars have different takes on this. Was it only for that battle? That's one question. Yeah, only for that battle, Allah made that miracle for him, or during his lifetime, and it didn't occur again.
Yeah, jazakallah khair. Well, I don't think there's any dispute that the angels came down in battle. That's pretty much agreed upon. The difference is, did they come in future battles? And so, yes, they did come down in some future battles, many narrations about it. And there's a dispute over the ayat in Surah Ali Imran, where Allah talks about there being 3,000 angels being sent down, then 5,000. But wallahu alam, my own tahqiq, my opinion is that the angels came in any other battles as well. And they came down in different forms and shapes as well, right? So, yes.
So could you repeat the question? Sorry.
Oh, sorry. So the questions were, number one, did this event occur in the first Ramadan the Muslims experienced, being the first month of fasting? Yes, it was the first time they fasted. Second question is, did angels come down in other battles? And wallahu alam, I believe they did come down in other battles. I don't know if Abu Dhari anything else.
Yeah, there is a comment not related to the procedures of the battle, barakallah feek, but after the battle, and it's related to what to do with the captives, with the prisoners of war.
Let's take this. It's easier. Yeah.
Or you can go near the camera.
No,
that's fine.
just take the
That's
mic
fine.
so they can hear you on the stream.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There are some indications telling us that Rasulullah SAW already knew the rules related to the captives of the war. One of which is everyone agrees on is what you mentioned about Sariyat ibn Jahsh. When he met Quraysh in the sacred month, and they captured 2 people and got their belongings, and then the ayat of the sacred months were revealed. Rasulullah ﷺ accepted the spoils of the war, and he ransomed one. So the rule was there even from then. The other point is about Surah Muhammad. Surah Muhammad is whether it is Madani or Makki. Imam al-Suyuti and some other Mufassirin brought up 2 views. One view says it's Madani, and one view says it's Makki. I like the commentary of Abu Na'al al-Mawdudi regarding the surah. He said that if we study the theme of the surah, we can see that it is setting the situation for the future engagement. So he thinks that it is Makki too. Allahu A'lam.
Okay.
So, but this has nothing to do with the procedures of the battle itself. Barakallah fiik.
Exactly. Other questions?
Yeah, I had a question.
Yeah.
Going back to the point just before the battle when Sahabi approached the Prophet Muhammad, whether it was his own choice that he chose that place to camp versus the Wahi. Can a rule be established as to what the Prophet said or did was Wahi versus not Wahi?
Can you repeat that?
Yeah. So the question is, when the Prophet ﷺ was asked by Hubab ibn Munzir that is this location Wahi or is it your choice? Can we establish from that kind of how to distinguish? I mean, the general rule of thumb that we take, right, is وَمَا يَنْطِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ, right? The Prophet ﷺ does not speak from his desires. The default ruling we would take is that what he's saying is Wahi. And this is why only of certain circumstances of when you would not consider something to be explicitly religious. And scholars categorize some of those things. So we have the famous narration about when the Prophet ﷺ is talking about agriculture, and he told them that that's from the umuri dunyakum, right? That's from the worldly affairs. So he's clarifying that that's not he didn't say that out of revelation. You also have what's called af'al jibiliyah, a certain kind of human just behaviors of the Prophet ﷺ, like the food that he liked, right? The way that he dressed. These are not things that get the status of wahi. So for instance, is wearing a thobe sunnah, right? That's what scholars will say. No. Some of them will say that's just his human, cultural behavior. So the scholars have attempted to kind of compartmentalize these, but it is very hard to take just a statement of his and say, like, is that revelation or not in and of itself? You got to look at it within the context. Right? Was he speaking about it in a religious situation? Was he speaking about it like in a business sense? So if someone's asking him like an opinion about food, and then he gives an opinion, like that's more now as a legislator. But if someone's just saying the Prophet ﷺ didn't eat this, well, that's not in the state of a legislator. It might just be he didn't like this food, and that's why he said certain things. I don't like to eat certain things, but it's halal for you to eat, right? So yeah, there is a procedure that you have to go through to figure out whether it is wahi or not, but the default is that it's going to be wahi most likely.
The reason I ask is there is a huge following in the subcontinent of Tib and Nabawi, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they just attribute
That's fine.
a
Yeah.
bunch of things to the Prophet, saying that the Prophet did this and did that. So was that wahi or was it not?
So that falls in this exact same classical argument, is that the Prophet Islam is practicing medicine because everyone practices medicine in every society and people get sick. So is it a prophetic act or is it a human act? And the scholars are differed on it. Some say it's just a human act, some say it's a prophetic act, and some say some are prophetic and some are human, right? And I know Abu Tariq's opinion on this, right? And I know many others. I do like to advocate for some level of tawaqquf sometimes. Like you can say, I don't know, and then let time figure out whether or not that seems to be the right type of thing to do. I'll give you an example, right? I think I was talking to somebody recently about this, the issue of cupping, right? Is cupping prophetic or not? Well, we know the Prophet cupped. Now, is it sunnah or not is a separate issue. Well, the more evidence that comes out that says cupping is healthy and valuable, the more you might be comfortable saying, this can be now more like confident that this may be from the sunnah, right? Because I have more evidence to support it. But just any medical practice in and of itself, I don't have to have that default, right? Right? Ibn Qayyim has this famous book, Tib an-Nabawi, right, where he argues from one perspective. So these are issues where there's valid difference. If one wants to follow that, they're welcome to. If they don't want to, there's no problem. But no one should say, hey, you're not doing the prophetic medicine, right? Right? But you have some hadith, like where he says, you know, like for instance, with black seed, right? That there is a cure, right? That is at some level, like, that is not just like historical medical practice. There is good in black seed, right? So it's from the sunnah, take black seed. Is it a panacea for everything? Maybe not, right?
But there is actually, sorry to.
Yeah, you know, it's okay.
But there is a prophetic aspect of it.
Yes.
Even these technical things, actually. Yeah, I mean, who gave Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam the line that separates between the wahi in the case of Badr, as an example, and the strategic decisions? It's the wahi. Who gave the Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam the green light or the outline about how to judge in a case when two people came to him, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and he told him, I'm a human being, I'm going to judge based on what I hear from you. So he was acting as a judge. And in the future, no judge will receive revelation. So that by the wahi, he was told, go ahead and do this. So even in the medical aspects, and Al-Qadi Iyad and Ibn Khaldun, of the view that says it's a technical issue. But who gave him the authority to practice this? It's the revelation. So actually, the default is the revelation. That's agreed.
Speaking of the miracle from Allah with the malaika and the dedication of Muslim over there, the fact that they previously make it a success, right? What kind of examples we take from that battles with the current situations? You know, what kind of is there something we are missing? Or a lot of time I try to reconcile these two and what we are missing and understanding more about lot timings.
Okay. Let me come back to that later because I want to tie that back to Gaza more. Okay. So give me a bit. Yeah. Okay. There was a hand in the back first. No. Yeah.
I want to say that, mashallah, for part of the last comments that are made and stuff, there will be a very great discussion tonight after Tarawih regarding how to look at Tarawih. Sorry, how to look at Sunnah. You're shutting it off. Light. How the Sunnah could be viewed, and so there will be a good discussion. I invite everybody to come after the Tarawih. And I want to say one comment. MashaAllah, when you covered the whole event was very well done, number one. It was very eye-opening. But MashaAllah, we should also remember that even the Sahaba Karam, when they returned back for many years after that, they continued to look to the people who fought in Badr as the Sahabi of the Badr. They really looked up to the people, even though they had doubts.
Of course, yeah.
MashaAllah, but all the Sahaba Karam looked to them as very senior, people who participated in this very great event.
Yeah, Jazakallah khair. The Prophet said that the people of Badr can do whatever they want for Allah has forgiven them, right? So there's hadith about that. They are, you know, they have a special virtue. And there's explicit examples about this. I won't go into it now. But of course, my point is to just acknowledge that the human aspect is there. Allah wants to preserve that even they were a little bit reticent for a short period of time, but then their hearts became firm and then they moved forward without any wavering, right? Allah, Jazakallah khair. Good.
We're trying to put 15 to 20 minutes for sorry.
Yeah, no worries. Okay. All right, so let's talk about Gaza a bit and then we'll come back. Quick question? Yeah.
No, go ahead.
If it's about the battle itself, that's fine.
Well, it's about the battle connected to Gaza.
Okay, so let's just, all right. So a few things I wanted to mention so first thing is important just to have the facts of the battle. Because the facts of the battle allow you now to draw parallels. And I want to make a big kind of disclaimer here, or kind of maybe like a thesis statement here that people often say that, well, you know what, we can't make qiyas from the battles of the Prophet Islam to today because of their circumstances were so unique, right? And I find this to be so ridiculous because then it's useless to learn anything from these battles, right? So we can absolutely try and draw parallels from each of these battles while acknowledging that the circumstances will never be a one-to-one correlation. That's not needed. So a few things that come to mind. Number one, in the Battle of Badr, or the build-up to Battle of Badr, one of the causes of it was that the Muslims were refugees, essentially kicked out of Mecca, driven out of their homeland, forced to find another place to be in, and they're refugees, essentially, right, in Medina for many years. They don't have their houses, right? And that matches very well the parallel to what our brothers and sisters in Gaza are going to, right? They have been driven out of their homes, and even they're in refugee camps, and they're still not safe and secure in those refugee camps, right? Number two is the element of what I want to tie together is how we as Muslims see victory and tie that to how the companions had to be reprogrammed. Surah Al-Anfal really, really works hard to say to the companions, all those psychological hangups you have, we need to fix those. So number one, you see the enemy as being large. You see them as being informidable. You see them as being just a plethora, right, of people. Let's get that out of your mind. So we're going to take it out of your mind in the dream. We're going to take it out of your mind when you're on the battlefield. I need to focus on this point a lot because currently today, one of the arguments you find against any sort of resistance and dealing with with the enemy is that there's too many Zionists, right? They have too much power, right? And if we keep that narrative going, it's causing exactly what we see. لَفَشِلْتُمْ وَلَتَنَازَعْتُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ. That it causes us to lose hope and it causes us to bicker and quarrel. To say, oh, we shouldn't be doing these things. The enemy is too powerful. Allah is telling us, see them as small. See them as insignificant. Because you don't want to give them a power that they don't have. It's really, really important point. So please, in the discourse, when you hear people talking like this, tell them, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knew that the companions were going against a larger force, right? And encouraged them to see the enemy as small. We need to learn from that. And subhanAllah, just give some real practical examples. People are worried that if you try to say something against the Zionists, you're going to get in trouble because they're so powerful, right? And there's example after example after example of how people are saying things, but they're still safe and they're still secure. So do not let that hysteria out there limit you or anybody else from doing something because of this fear of the size of the enemy. Number two, people talk about the wealth of the enemy, that the Zionists are so well funded, right? That the IDF is well funded, right? That how can we overcome this? AIPAC is $100 billion and all these things. And again, I want to draw us back to what the Quran exactly discusses this scenario. Because Quraysh had way more money, had way more arms, everything seemed in their favor. And Allah tells us in the middle of the surah, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا يُنْفِقُونَ أَمْوَالَهُمْ لِيَصُدُّوا عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. That indeed those who disbelieve will spend to avert from the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَسَيُنْفِقُونَهَا. They will surely do it. We should not have any other expectation, but they will spend their wealth for causes of kufr. But then Allah says, فَسَيُنْفِقُونَهَا ثُمَّ تَكُونُ عَلَيْهِمْ حَسْرًا. Then it will be a source of regret for them. ثُمَّ يُغْلَبُونَ وَالَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا إِلَى جَهَنَّمَ يُحْشَرُونَ. Then the people of disbelief will be driven right to hellfire. Really want to emphasize, their wealth has no barakah. Their lobbying, right? Their attempts to use money to change the narrative, you can see it before your eyes falling flat today. That there's legislation, you have all the media, right? You have the mainstream media in your pocket, and you have so many other abilities to try and control the narrative. But something as simple as these apps that kids are using for free is changing the narrative to the extent they're trying to ban now these apps, right, and have legislation against this. This shows us what? I don't need to have a cable TV station worth millions of dollars in order to have an impact. Because Allah can bless our efforts, and He strips their efforts actually of barakah. It has to be deep in our heart. View your dollar as worth infinite times more than their dollar. And Allah says the same thing actually about our numbers. In the surah, He talks about it, even about if you're patient, how much more each one of us matters compared to our enemy. So it's not about the numbers. That's why Allah said that وَلَن تُغْنِيَ عَنْكُمْ فِئَتُكُمْ شَيْئًا وَلَوْ كَثُرًا. That it doesn't matter how plentiful the enemy seems, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ultimately is with the few. And this is why the ayat come up over and over in the Quran. كَم مِّن فِئَةٍ قَلِيلَةٍ غَلَبَتْ فِئَةً كَثِيرَةً, right? بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ. How many small groups overcome large groups? So this surah, what it's telling you is, and Allah does it over and over and over, stop worrying about the worldly needs. Do your job. وَعِدُّ لَهُمْ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُم مِّن قُوَّةٍ. Prepare everything you can. But look, even on the battlefield, when the Prophet ﷺ throws the dust, it's not the action, right, that is causal in and of itself. That's Sahabi, right, who captures Abbas. It wasn't because of his strength he did it, right? You do your part, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala facilitates it. And this is the delta that often we're missing, because we often try to say worldly means they're greater, we're going to lose. No, we're going to be less, they're going to have more. If we have taqwa, iman, ikhlas, and all those spiritual ingredients, then the awn of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will come. That is our aqidah, right? That is exactly how it works. That's historically how it's worked, and we'll cover it probably through the whole month, right? Even the seerah gives us beautiful examples that when the Muslims are large, how Allah actually makes them not successful at times to show them it's not about your numbers. In Hunayn, right? You look like you're so many, but guess what? It's not going to be about your numbers. And that's why the hadith of the Prophet, you will come a time where you're like the foam of the ocean. Your numbers are huge. So let us not think our victory comes in our numbers, right? Or it doesn't mean that we don't try to increase our numbers and increase our finances. It's just we don't have yaqeen in the asbab. We have it in the Rabb, the Lord of those asbab. We can go into so many other things as well. One of the things I do want to draw a parallel to, I know this can get controversial to some people, but goes back to even, quote unquote, the events that didn't start on October 7th. But this idea that the Prophet ﷺ is initiating the attack while there's no direct threat on him in that moment in time. But there's a general aura of warfare around him, right? There is intermittent attacks, there is threats that are being done. So he is not required to wait to be attacked in order to attack back. And so for our brothers and sisters in Gaza, they don't have to sit there and wait that when you drop a bomb on me, then I'm going to go and do it. They've been bombs dropped on them for 75 years, right? So this argument that, well, you know what happened the day before and what's happening, this is all nonsense, right? They are in a situation of warfare, and resistance during warfare can be done, in this circumstance where they are preemptively getting the enemy who has been kind of seeking them, right, for a number of years, right? Other thing to talk about is even the fact that, subhanAllah, it was infuriating to many Muslims. So you'd see even Netanyahu and other folks would invoke God, right, in this. You'd see the Twitter, you'd see the post on social media where he's saying and quoting Old Testament, all these things. Take this actually as a bishara. Because when they start to invoke Allah, this is good for us, right? In tastaftihu faqad ja'akum al-fath, right? You ask Allah for victory, He will give you. He will answer your dua, but not in the way you want it to be answered. So it's best they keep Allah out of their mouth, right? And for us, we do the opposite. إِذْ تَسْتَغِيثُونَ رَبَّكُمْ, right? Our dua, we have full yaqeen that it is going to be accepted. So in these blessed nights, right, that are more valuable than any other nights of the year, let the people of Gaza, right, be in your dua, right? We can keep going. There's so many more, right? But I can even talk about captives and these type of things if we want to get into it, right? When you're in a situation of war, right? The Prophet ﷺ, previously, as Abu Tariq has alluded to, right, and even after the Battle of Badr it even happened, Prophet ﷺ would exchange captives after the Battle of Badr, right? There's a situation where one of the Muslims, I forgot which one it was, he went to perform the Umrah and he got captured by Quraysh. Because again, he was operating under the principle that we should be able to walk freely because Quraysh offers, safe haven to people who come. And so Quraysh captured him and then told the Prophet ﷺ, if you want to get him back, we have to make a trade, prisoner exchange, right? So prisoner exchanges are also valid in Islam. So if resistance is trying to capture prisoners, right, from a legitimate enemy to trade them, right, that is permissible. Even the Battle of Badr, right, sets some precedent, right, even for that. And one beautiful example, actually, even from the Battle of Badr, I'll tell you, there was a man, what's his name? Umayr ibn Wahab, right, one of the leaders of Quraysh. He came back after the battle to plead. He claims that he came to plead for a captive, right? So he comes and Umar sees him, and Umar, subhanAllah, just by chance, Omar is narrating to the companions who are not at Badr what was happening in Badr. And so imagine how excited he is. Imagine Omar telling the story, right? Like how exciting would that be? And the Sahaba are listening, and this guy Omer walks in and he's armed. So Omar grabs him and takes him to the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet says, "Why are you here?" He says, "I'm here to argue on behalf of the captives, right? That you treat them well and so on and so forth." And he says to him, "You're lying." He says, "You came here because you were sitting with Safwan ibn Umayyah, and you told him that if you didn't have this debt over your shoulders, that you would go and you would kill Muhammad. And so Safwan told you, if you go, that I promise to pay off your debts and take care of your kids. So you're here to kill me." And then Omer said essentially, like, "La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah," right? You converted, right? And he went back, right? And Safwan and Quraysh was like waiting for like good news. That came back as a Muslim, right? But the point here is that everybody understood that coming to negotiate for the behalf of prisoners of war was legitimate, right? The Prophet did it and Quraysh did it as well, right? So it's again this notion that somehow that Muslims cannot have any captives, right, is ridiculous. Another point, in the battle, you actually saw how the Prophet ﷺ treated the captives. Some of those captives were narrated later on that how they were being given better food because they're still traveling, right? And they don't have access to high quality food. There was bread and there would be dates and water. The Sahaba would eat the bread, the dates and the water, and they would give the captives bread, which is higher quality, right? It's got more calories and it's more desirable. And so they would actually be embarrassed, some of the captives, like, "Here, you take some bread." And it's like, no, we have to take care of you guys, right? وَيُطْعِمُونَ الطَّعَامَ عَلَى حُبِّهِ مِسْكِينًا وَيَتِيمًا وَأَسِيرًا, right? إِنَّمَا نُطْعِمُكُمْ لِوَجْهِ اللَّهِ. So الإنسان, about the way that we deal with captives because it's for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal. So the Prophet demonstrated that in Badr. So the fact that he executed some of the enemies, right, is not contradictory to this, because those were like leaders of kufr, whereas the other ones were just generic captives. So he had no problem treating them well and then dealing with them in these different ways. So we look today in Gaza, what's the situation? How are the people of Gaza taking care of their captives? And you compare that to how the IDF, how they deal with their captives, right? And this is why the Surah Al-Anfal is so beautiful, because the theme of it is that if Allah is not on your mind, you will not be just even in war. Because this is when, subhanAllah, everyone knows conflict is when the worst comes out of us. We know in divorce, the worst comes out of people, right? And that's like a non-physical conflict, usually, right? But like in this case, like you have your enemy. If anybody you want to let your rage out on, right, it's against your enemy in a war, right? But Surah Al-Anfal and Ghazwat Badr are teaching us this is the time. And that's why the surah comes over and over and over, telling you to be mindful of Allah, having taqwa. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, idha laqitum fi'atan fathbutu wadhkurullaha la'allakum tuflihun, right? That when you meet the enemy, stand firm, but be mindful of Allah. When you finish the battle, be mindful of Allah, right? And that's why Allah said what in the surah? Before he talked about the Anfal, right, he said what? إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ الَّذِينَ إِذَا ذُكِرَ اللَّهُ وَجِلَتْ قُلُوبُهُم, right? وَإِذَا تُلِيَتْ عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتُهُ زَادَتْهُمْ إِيمَانًا وَعَلَى رَبِّهِمْ يَتَوَكَّلُونَ الَّذِينَ يُقِيمُونَ الصَّلَاةَ وَمِمَّا رَزَقْنَاهُمْ يُنْفِقُونَ. All of the spiritual beliefs and behaviors came first before Allah wanted to discuss anything, right, about the battle. So this is our grounding. This is our grounding we always have to keep in mind. Because if we don't, and that's what's going to lead to the errors that the enemy will capitalize on. So just like we spoke about today, when a mistake was made by Abdullah ibn Jahsh in battle, right, that he was forgiven for, right, fighting the sacred month, it led to rumors and it led to arguments even in Medina. So any little error, right, that lacks discipline will be exploited by the enemy. And we see it today. They try to exploit everything. Wallah alhamd, right? They have practically no evidence of it, but you can see how they will pounce on anything, right? We have all this video evidence about them, and they put all these claims, and they have no evidence, of course, right? But that's again going back for us to be like the discipline, because especially in today's world, right? This army, right, of the IDF is exactly like the ayah says. وَإِذْ زَيَّنَ لَهُمُ الشَّيْطَانُ أَعْمَالَهُمْ, right? Shaitan has beautified their deeds for them, right? وَقَالَ لَا غَالِبَ لَكُمُ الْيَوْمَ مِنَ النَّاسِ, and told them, you will not be overcome. Who would broadcast their war crimes? Who would broadcast like the most heinous acts if they thought they could be held accountable for it? Right? No one would. But Shaitan is telling them that you're good to go. You're safe, right? And for us, so now Garden Grove, I will not pick on them for cutting off my live stream. So again, there's just so many things we can keep drawing from, but if you don't have this type of knowledge of the battle, right? You can't make that type of an analogy, right? So it goes, you can go point by point by point by point about what is permissible, what is not. So even if, again, certain generals are captured, right, they can be executed, right? And that's differing than, so let's say, a lay soldier or someone else who might ransom off, trade, right, so on and so forth, all right? Wallahu alam. I think we're running low on time, so we'll open it up for more Q&A. So, yes.
Jazakallah for showing the picture. You had mentioned how the culture was built and developed during the Prophet's time. The young kids, 13-year-old, are ready to go into the battle. I was reading one of the articles about Gaza, where a young man, probably in his 30s, had mentioned that we have only two options, and he's been moved from northern Gaza to central to Rafah. So they are camped out in Rafah. And he had mentioned his sentiment that we have only two options left here. Either to stay put here as captives or ideas surrounding them, or if we move, we face death. So that's the sentiment of a 30-year-old. Obviously, I'm not trying to equate everybody else, including me, would be in the same situation, trying to hide, move places to places as they were pushed into. But compared to the sentiment that we had in the Prophet's time, that they were eager to go into, Korea or Shahad. That type of sentiment is no longer in the wide Ummah. So how do we build that?
So the question has to do with the sentiments that exist on the ground today, that there's some people who are in Gaza and they're feeling a sense of despair, they're trying to run away, right? They're not feeling a sense of wanting to run, right, into conflict. I would argue that is the exception. What you're seeing the norm in the people of Gaza is absolute rida and satisfaction with what Allah has decreed, and video after video after video of their joy, even with martyrdom, their tears that they've lost their beloved, but also a sense of pride and joy. And you can find thousands of those videos of like, I lost my mom, I lost my dad, alhamdulillah, like they're martyrs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I think that is the norm. And I would say that again, a lot of what you're going to see today in the next few months are psyops, right? Psychological operations to change our mindset over what's happening. And so you're going to find these people, again, who will be, quote unquote, have Muslim names, right? Even have, like videos, that look like they're coming from Gaza, or maybe they're even from Gaza. These are not actually representing our community, right? Because these people are being given, in many cases, a free ticket, right? For certain things, are given rewards. So some of this has already been uncovered since day one, right? There's people who will say, oh, well, they'll start to poke a hole and kind of be very critical. And then it'll turn out that they actually work for the FBI. So I think we need to be very, very careful in believing any of the narrative that's going against the mainstream narrative, which is that this is a battle between truth and falsehood. And look, I really, again, might be controversial for people to say, but I have no problem saying it because I believe it deep in my heart with yaqeen. The Sahaba wanted a caravan that was unarmed. What did the resistance want? They didn't want an all-out battle. They wanted to capture an unarmed group and probably exchange them for prisoners, which they had a right to. There's thousands of people in prison. They're like, okay, you know what? Last time we did this, we got for one soldier of theirs, like I forgot the number of people of Gaza who were freed. So in their head, they wanted something small, right? But Allah wanted something else, right? So this is the qadr of Allah Azza wa Jal that He wanted, that He is manifesting. He does it with His hikmah. And people to think that somehow Gaza and Palestine is going to be opened bloodlessly, I think is ridiculous. Now, if you go back to history, and you go back to even Salah ad-Din's time before, Salah ad-Din, I should say 100 years before, when Palestine was conquered, more than 30,000 people were massacred, right? So this is not unprecedented, right? So people think that, this is something unique. No, Muslims have been massacred before. Blood was flowing in the streets, and it's not going to be cheap to free Gaza, essentially, right? And that's why I believe the people of Gaza, they are the ones in the driver's seat with what they want to do, and the vast majority are not throwing resistance under the bus. And if that's what they're doing, then we should follow that suit, right? And be careful of those who are doing otherwise. They are seeking martyrdom, right? They're happy with martyrdom. SubhanAllah, it's just, you see that the videos, they're praying Tarawih, they're still memorizing Quran. It's funny because whenever I see those videos, I think about what I live in SoCal. And I literally give this example, I think last year or the year before. I was praying tarawih in the masjid. Just like the power went off here 2-3 times. I think I was with Abu Rashid in Garden Grove, and the AC was out. Right? One night in Ramadan. People freaking out. They literally like the board. We can't pray in these circumstances. We can't pray in these circumstances, right? Right? And sometimes you need that. You need to see what other people are dealing with to ground yourself and be like, oh, how off the track am I? So when you see what some of these young boys there, the way they talk and the way they act, you look back at your children and say, am I raising a fragile snowflake? Right? Right? Alhamdulillah, I have no problem being confident when I speak about children. This is my expertise, right? Like, we are raising the weakest generation, right? The Muslim community and outside, right? I deal with it. I teach in the university. I see it with the university kids. I see it with the Muslim kids. Because we have this fear that somehow if we make them not allowed to, if we don't let them just play video games all day long and just focus on academics, that they're not going to succeed, right? But actually, all the research tells you the exact opposite, right? The more you put your kids in hardship, right? The more that you selectively, voluntarily put them in difficult situations, the more resistant they're going to become. Because one day, it's not going to be so pretty, right? And for all of us, we should see the writing on the wall, even if you live here, whether it be an economic recession, whether it be anything else, prepare your kids for difficulty, right? Whether that be what you choose to leave or you choose to be in that situation or you don't, but it will come. And if you don't prepare your kids, you're going to regret it because they're going to fall apart. Right? This epidemic of kids' mental health, all kinds of things, it is real, but it is a consequence of how they're being raised as well. Right? So the people of Gaza are our role model, actually, of probably how to raise our kids, right? And we should probably pick up more tips from them. Other questions? Sisters, and we haven't heard from you all too much.
I have a question, but
Yes.
it's more about the battle. So
That's okay.
you didn't really finish the point about when the people that the enemy that were killed were put in the wells. What was the miracle?
So the debate was when the Prophet ﷺ is speaking to them and he's saying, have you found what your Lord promised you to be true, The companions were like, why are you speaking to dead people? The Prophet is saying they can hear you as well as you can hear me. So I'm saying that there's two opinions. Some say that the dead can hear in general. Some say that was an exception for the Prophet, right? Because they use the verse, "Innaka la tasmi'u al-mauta," right? Yeah. So you can't make the dead hear, essentially, right? And that has a tafsir to it, but Aisha, right, would use that as evidence for why they can't hear. But other companions and scholars would say no, they can't. So yeah. So
Question and then a comment. Question is, do the sacred months have any bearing on us to this day? Like, in any sense?
yes, it's not mansukh. So the ruling is supposed to be that in those 4 sacred months of Rajab, the question is the ruling about not initiating war in the sacred months still valid, right? So in the 12-month Islamic calendar, 4 of those are considered Ashhur al-Hurum, right? The sacred months, Rajab, right? Dhul Qa'dah, Dhul Hijjah, right? And Muharram. So 3 of those have to do with Hajj. The idea here is that people travel for Hajj before the month of Hajj, and they'll travel back the month after. So you might leave in Dhul Qa'dah, right? You'll be in the region in Dhul Hijjah, you'll come back in Muharram. So those 3 months was a time where there's no initiating warfare, because people should be able to make safe passage, right? And then Rajab is kind of a standalone month. But that ruling is that you're not allowed to initiate fighting. So offensive jihad, which again comes back to the debate, is there offensive jihad or not? Right? And so this gives you some idea that there is. Because if there was no Ashur al-Hurum, then it wouldn't matter, because if someone fights you, right? You can't fight them anyway. You can't initiate fighting. But if they fight you in Al-Ashhur al-Hurum, you can fight them in Al-Ashhur al-Hurum, right? So it's not like, hey, it's Ramadan, they fought me, right? I can't fight back, right? So yeah.
We should have like a comment from online.
Yeah. Oh, I can. Let's see.
I can pass the mic over.
Yeah.
So you can read it out.
Sure. I can see the comments, all right? I should be able to.
It's on.
Oh, got it. Okay.
So the comment from online is saying that it's important to note that we are human beings as well, and they are also human beings, meaning the people of Gaza. Our emotions fluctuate, and capturing somebody on video when they're feeling low isn't indicative of anything except for that.
That was like regarding the.
That's fair. Yeah. Other questions or comments? Yeah.
You spoke about the spear which was saved by Prophet ﷺ. Is that still in existence, or did that get lost on the street?
Wallahu alam, I don't believe it's in existence. I think so. The question was the spear that Zubair ibn Awam used to strike, the enemy, is that still in existence? I think there's a replica in Turkey. I believe it's a replica in Turkey. Usually when they say these things have been preserved, I usually don't believe it. But specifically with this one, I don't think they even call it the actual one. So, but some things are probably preserved in these different places. That sphere doesn't seem to be the case. Wallahu a'lam.
Also pass the mic for the questions.
I just had a comment to add to what you were saying regarding our money carrying barakah where others do not. Just like the colonial Zionist project is very expensive when you talk about like PSYOPs, when you talk about the news media, when you talk about all that, very expensive to uphold where everything that we do is very free. If they run out of money, they will stop. Whereas we're just gonna keep going. I don't get paid to say I think Palestine should be free. I don't have a lot of there's nothing there financially for me.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And to add to that, like, so they could hear it because it's connected. Okay, like people have to get a couple of things. One is how do political action committees work, and how do most donations work in America? The vast majority is taken by overhead. So even when these Zionists are giving millions of dollars to organizations, most of this is going in the pocket of other Zionists, like not for Zionist work, right? The percent that actually goes to the efforts are small because they don't have that ihsan, right? And amana with their sadaqat, right? Same thing when they give it to politicians, right? Of course, a lot of the politicians, of course, squander that money in different ways. So that money is not going very far. And it's true, like even since this war started, you might have seen, there were Zionist organizations willing to pay Zionists to go and protest, right? Like $300, like, per person to go and protest, right? And it's finally, that was floating around, the Muslims grabbed it and they're like, we're gonna go, right? So they pulled it down. But the idea here is that like, we will go in the hundreds of thousands and we will post and we will do all these things. It's for free. So they cannot compete like with our free market, essentially, advocacy. And they can, even if they keep paying money for it, right? Our voice is actually louder and is drowning it out, which is why they need these algorithms, is why they need all these things. And alhamdulillah, we have brothers in tech who are trying to be gatekeepers at all the big tech companies to make sure that it's level, even ground. That's of course why TikTok is trying to be banned. As much as I hate TikTok, right? And it's trash for our generation. The fact that it's not regulated by the US companies, they don't suppress, the pro-Palestinian content the way they do, right? With Meta, right? And these other ones, right? So, jazakallah khair.
For probably one more comment, question.
Abdullah, finish. Give us a last comment.
Anybody? Okay. Jazakallah khairan, Dr. Rahman, for the wonderful presentation. Jazakallah khairan to all of you for coming, and Jazakallah khairan to ICSGB for hosting us. Inshallah, next week we will be having the liberation of Makkah, and that will be done by Brother Iyad Bilal. So inshallah, make sure to forward the video online to your family, friends, loved ones, enemies, anyone. And then inshallah, make sure to try and bring someone for next week and try to be here in person. جزاكم الله خيرا سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد ان لا اله الا انت نستغفرك ونتوب اليك اللهم اجعل اجتماعنا هذا اجتماعا معصوما واجعل تفرقنا من بعده تفرقا مرحوما ولا تدع فينا بيننا شقيا ولا محروما والعصر ان الانسان لفي خسر